Oh boy, did this ever take longer to release than it should have. Howdy folks, my name is Jacob, and this is the first episode in what promises to be a lengthy set of videos in which my friend Aidan and I discuss the excellent Harry Potter fanfiction series, the Rigel Black Chronicles. However, this first episode was recorded all the way back in June of last year, 2021. Many circumstances delayed me even being able to get around to editing this video, and then once I did start editing it, it kind of turned into a really big headache for me. The first 20 to 30 minutes of this video is myself and Aidan basically giving a spoiler-free recommendation of the series, explaining what it is and why you should read it. And then the remaining, as you can tell from looking at the length of this video, 2 hours of content is us devolving into an almost beat-for-beat breakdown of what happens in the first book. I was nervous for a little while that this was perhaps too much, and I spent quite some time, once I did actually get around to editing this video relatively recently, wringing my hands over what I should and shouldn't cut. I trimmed it down a lot. You know, it's one of those things where when you've stared at something for too long, you've listened to it too many times, you can't tell if it's any good or not, right? You just start seeing all of the problems. And I realized somewhere along the line that I had failed to internalize one of the most important lessons of the entire series that we are discussing, which is that sometimes an important part of taking care of yourself is taking the path of least resistance, even when there's a toxic voice inside of you somewhere saying that you're somehow letting yourself down by doing that. So I apologize if the back 2 hours of this are kind of unwieldy and awkward in spots. Hopefully, if you're listening to the entire thing, it's because you've read the first book and you're a fan of it, and you are willing to sit through listening to two people ramble about it for way too long. Because I'm done. I can't waste any more time editing this. It's starting to become unhealthy. So we're moving on. I'm getting this one out, and we'll get around to releasing the discussions of book 2. I don't know when. Whenever I have time to edit those too. The later episodes will hopefully be slightly more controlled than this one is. Anywho, I would also like to issue a very big thank you to fan and friend of the show, Joanna Garcia, for creating the art that you're seeing on screen right now of myself and Aidan dressed up in the style of casual clothing observed in the Harry Potter films, which Joanna described as Disney Channel chic. I wanted to do something special for these videos because, number one, I do really like this fanfiction series, and number two, there's gonna be a lot of these videos. But that's all you're getting out of me in this little preamble. Let's get to the goods. There we go. Forgot to silence my phone before I hit record, but you know what? I remembered not an hour into it when I got a phone call, so I got that going for me at least. Anyway, here for a very special episode of the Research Log, the first of many about a fanfiction series that we've talked about on during the Uncharted 2 playthrough. I suspect we may draw some audience from outside of our normal content. So as a point of reference, I'm Jacob.
I'm Aidan.
We are here to talk about what is generally referred to as the Rigel Black Chronicles, a series of Harry Potter fan fictions. Some people may be saying, Jacob, you're making a series about fan fiction now? No, I'm making a series about a fan fiction. Just this one. We're going to read these books, and we're going to talk about them as we go through. Aidan finished reading the first book a week ago now, or so. A little while ago.
Something like that.
You were faster than me, plus I was out of town anyway,
right.
So we couldn't have filmed even if I had finished it a bit faster. I've read all of all of this stuff that's out as it currently exists. You're reading through it now, and I'm rereading with you, and we're going to be talking about the books in this Harry Potter fanfiction series, starting with the first one called the Pureblood Pretense.
Yeah.
We did record kind of an episode of the Research Log as like an overall intro to the series, but it wound up being mostly just me word vomiting about the books, and I was like, I don't know how good this is. Maybe we'll just get into it. So Aidan, since I've said plenty about this series, both on and off screen, why don't you tell the people the basic premise of Murky Blue Matter / Violet Matters, the Pureblood Pretense / the Rigel Black Chronicles. I really hate calling it that. Yeah. I just like to call it the Pureblood Pretense. People get confused, though, because it's the book versus the series name.
Right. When I've been explaining it to people, when they're like, oh, what are you reading? I'm like, well, I am telling on myself. But what I am reading is one specific fan fiction that is a Harry Potter fan fiction. So it takes place within the Harry Potter stuff. But there are two major changes, and then the story is the result of those changes, really. The big one is that Voldemort never becomes Voldemort. Tom Riddle, at some point before becoming Voldemort, goes, maybe I shouldn't kill people.
Maybe I shouldn't. You think that killing people will make them like you, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
It just makes people dead.
So instead of killing people, Tom Riddle goes into politics and is just a jerk. Instead of also a mass murderer.
Yes.
And influences a lot of legislation, keeping not purebloods out of Wizarding Society.
And specifically, crucially to the beginning of the story, out of Hogwarts.
Yes.
Out of formal British magicking education.
Yes.
So Muggle-borns and even half-bloods are not allowed to attend Hogwarts in the present day of the story.
Yes. And then also, the other change is that Harry is a girl.
Yes. And so this is something that I talked about a bit during the Uncharted 2 playthrough, when I was kind of introducing this. Because I personally, I don't know what your record is, I don't think I've touched fan fiction in about 9-10 years.
Yeah. Not like seeking it out on my own. Every now and then, like, someone will send me one, but it's like maybe 3 or 4 pages. It's like someone had one idea that's hilarious, and you read those 3 or 4 pages, and that's all that exists. That's not like a long series. It's
Yes.
It's not like, well, I take that back. Some of them are weird, but not in like a sex weird, just weird.
But a part of why I ducked out of a lot of fan fiction stuff in the back of the day is more because of that other type of weird that you mentioned. But so I already kind of, again, I'm not going to repeat myself too much from the Uncharted 2 playthrough where we kind of introduced this a little bit. I discovered this through kind of a weird set of circumstances. I was like, this is kind of interesting, and for a lot of reasons, because there's a lot of people who talk about interesting ideas for AUs, alternate universes, kind of your for want of a nail situation. Let's change this one thing and see how that cascades out into everything else, right?
Right.
And see, a lot of those are interesting ideas to me, but also usually even ones that people have big fan fictions built around. To me, a lot of those ideas really don't sustain themselves for longer than a short Tumblr post of like, here's this interesting idea that I had, and let's think about the idea and have fun with it conceptually, but like, does it really support the narrative meat and potatoes of like a story?
Right.
And for a number of reasons, partially because I read some spoilers on tvtropes.com when I was first reading about this, I was like, this sounds more interesting. It's got its own kind of fan base, this fan fiction. It's kind of big. So maybe I should look into this. The author, who generally goes by Violet. I don't believe she's ever published her real name. Maybe Violet is her name, I don't know. But her username on fanfiction.net is Murky Blue Matter. Generally speaking, she signs as Violet or Violet Matter. But she's been working on this fanfiction for quite some time.
Yeah,
she started
I was looking at the published dates, and I was like, yo, this has been out for a while.
So she started the first book when she was in grad school in 2011, and she kept cranking these out for a while at a pretty decent speed until around like 2016 or so when things started slowing down. When she started the fourth book in 2016.
Okay.
And she only finished the fourth book in January or February of this year, 2021.
Okay.
And even then, it took her quite a while to start book 5. Though, to be fair, I think she wanted to have book 5 all mapped out before she started writing it. We'll talk about one of the problems with the first book is that she didn't really do that.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that later. Violet is also working on a webcomic. I believe it's on webtoons.com or whatever it's called Forever After, which is a story. I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going to get into it in too much detail right now, just because I want to keep our discussion relatively brief, so we can break into the first book here. But she's writing a webcomic that someone else is doing the art for about a kind of a spoiled bratty girl who wants to be a fairy tale princess, gets sucked into fairy tale settings, and thinks this is going to be great. But she's given the task of being the prince in a bunch of different stories and doing all of the hard work of completing the stories. Right. So that comic isn't too far along yet, but it's also quite good. And I recommend anybody, there may be some people who don't know about that comic who maybe stumble upon this because they read the fan fiction. Highly recommend they go check that out. Also, Violet has talked about a couple of times an original novel of her own conception that I don't know how far along it is. I don't know if she's like working on it or if it's written, trying to find a publisher. I have no idea. I will say, if Violet winds up listening to this, I really like that comic you're working on, and everything you've said about that book so far sounds really interesting, and I will be in line day one. So if there isn't a line at the bookstore, I will generate a line. Aidan and I will go, and we'll bring other friends,
Yes,
and we will create buzz.
Absolutely.
So other people in the store think that it's, is this some famous cool author? And
Hire
they'll
a DJ to stand outside of the
oh yeah, we will buy it, and we will move units for you if you ever write this book. But that being said, please, though I know you have another career, at least if you can't finish this Harry Potter fan fiction, at least at some point write a summary of what was gonna happen, because I have to know what happens to Harry and her friends. Has to know. You can't leave me hanging. But anyway, so I said her, yeah. So Harry is a girl is one of the other major things of this. And this to me is something that was kind of a red flag when I was initially reading about it.
Yeah.
Because this is the type of stuff that's like kind of easy fan fiction fodder that appears in stuff written by 12-year-olds.
Right.
That usually is not super appealing. But something that Violet has talked about is that she specifically, one of her starting points with the whole thing was, could you write Femme Harry and make an interesting story out of that? And so everything is kind of built around making that actually interesting, which pulls from how the series is inspired largely by the Alana the Lioness / Song of the Lioness series of novels, which are at least the first couple of books about a girl pretending to be a boy in order to attend a school to learn how to be a knight in a society where girls aren't allowed to do that.
Yes.
So, since you were talking about a second ago, there's legislation that prevents half-bloods and Muggleborns from attending Hogwarts. Harry wants to go to Hogwarts, and she has to pretend to be a boy and take the place of Sirius Black's son, who in this universe, Sirius Black got married and had a kid because there was no big war. He wasn't accused of killing James and Lily Potter because they're still alive.
Yep.
So she and Archie, Sirius's son, switch places. He goes to an American school that Harry was supposed to be going to. She goes to Hogwarts pretending to be a boy as him. And that's what the first book is about, is her first year at Hogwarts masquerading as a pure-blooded boy.
Yes.
Going by a different name, goes by Rigel Black. I was saying to you previously, like, this author is really good at coming up with just terrible Harry Potter names.
Yeah.
I mean, in like a positive way, because Harry Potter's side character names are awful in like in a hilarious way. Archie's full name is Erraticus Rigel Black, which is just gross. It's perfect.
It's wonderful.
And so at school, mostly for our own, like to make the prose easier to read, Harry goes by Rigel.
Yeah.
So that,
and I love the note that she as Harry is like, I should refer to
it would
myself.
be confusing in my own head. Yeah, it's the only real really clear fourth wall break in the whole thing. Where basically in prose she was like, it would get confusing if I was calling myself this and that. I'll just do this to make it easier to understand.
That was interesting.
Yeah. The series, I think, is interesting kind of pretty early on anyway, but it gets quite good later on. I was a little bit concerned, honestly, Aidan, about you reading through this, because when I originally read it, I had a little bit of difficulty getting through book 1. I believe I commented during the Uncharted 2 playthrough that I was quotation marks only cringing 5 to 10 times a chapter, and I said that as a positive because usually I will tap out of fan fiction much faster than that. I described having a fight or flight response to the UI of fanfiction.net, and that wasn't a joke. I literally had to switch to night mode and adjust the scaling in browser to stop myself from feeling wigged out by the site. But I'm better about that now that I've been reading this and having a positive experience. But the first book is a little bit rough. I kind of warned that in the Uncharted video. I talked to you about that beforehand. I, especially upon rereading it, had, I guess before I talk about this too much, I think the other books, like the quality only grows exponentially, leaps and bounds. Like I think book 4, there's spots where it's like, ooh, you can tell there wasn't a professional editor on this because there's a couple of typos here and there. But like other than that, and the fact that the book is gargantuan in size, and the chapters are like most of the chapters in book 4 should be split into like 5 chapters. They're insane. But like other than that, it's essentially publishable. Book 1's kind of rough, and I was a little bit worried that you might be put off with it, which is why I was so pleased when you texted me saying you're like halfway through it and you're like, I am having so much fun with this. This is great. I want a hardback version of this on the shelf.
I would. I absolutely, not only will we buy the other book, but if these are ever available for purchase, I will buy all of them, probably multiple times.
Yeah, no, I was quite pleased when you said you were having such a good time. I guess I want to talk about briefly, just with you having just read the first one. No spoilers, obviously, like kind of what you found so appealing about it.
I kept going back, and because I did finish it a week ago, I went back and just kind of read some of the beginning chapters just to keep them fresh. I kept going back to... there are a lot of moments where you forget that these 11-year-olds are 11-year-olds, but there were a lot of moments where you were very, like, in your face, but in a good way, where you're like, these are children. And I haven't read the OGs in a long time, but I'm not sure I ever really remembered feeling that way, because I think the first ones got so, like, dark and heavy so quickly. And also, in spite of myself, I am a self-professed Snape hater. I hate Snape. I think you're supposed to hate Snape.
Sure, yeah. No, Snape's net. Listen, I guess we should state right now, even though we won't get into spoilers for this fan fiction for a few minutes. It's open season on Harry Potter canon spoilers. No, I think sure what Snape did is like heroic and cool or whatever, and it's like sure, yes, ultimately he was a good guy. He also like tortured children for fun and like subjected 11-year-olds to like verbal abuse and is just casually cruel to people.
I very much feel like Snape's whole character was, I was traumatized, so now I get to traumatize. Mm-hmm. And the only reason, I am a firm believer in the fact that the only reason he ever did anything nice in the end for Harry is because he still wanted to bang Harry's dead mom. Like, I do not like OG Severus Snape in the slightest.
He's an interesting character, but he's not a likable human being.
Like whatever, he's
one of my favorite characters, but he's not a nice guy.
No, but I just thoroughly despise him. However, all of that said, this stupid fan fiction, without getting, I'll talk more about it later probably, but it's so good at characterizing that I don't hate this Snape.
So that's something that's interesting, because early on I was telling you about like this fan fiction has a lot of other like red flag fan fiction things of like. Because, like, the easy fan thing is, let's focus on the Slytherins, right?
Right.
I want to make Draco Malfoy a good guy and have him kiss Hermione or Harry. Who cares?
Now
Kiss
that
whoever,
Harry's a
right?
girl.
Or guy, too, you know. We know how fan fiction works. It's all over the place. Kiss whoever. Kiss anybody. Doesn't matter, right? And I
really appreciated that there was none of that while they're 11.
Yes.
Like, whatever, we can do that later, but I was a little concerned with, like...
It happens!
This fanfiction starting.
This is
why
11-year-olds I haven't been on fanfiction.net in 10 years!
Are we gonna get weird? And we did not.
Yes.
So that was very nice.
But yeah, it is a... certain things that are like, okay, hold on, this could be a problem, but it's like there's enough interesting ideas in here that I'll let it play out, because you have Harry getting sorted into, or female Harriet getting sorted into Slytherin. This leads to, though, a lot more interesting stuff than I think most fan fiction that are just like, let's put the character, even more so than like The Cursed Child, which is fan fiction about let's put the character in Slytherin.
Yeah.
Because you have, for a number of things that make it interesting. Number one, there's a whole kind of, since there's no war in the background of this world anymore, there's instead a major political schism, and you have Harry, in this case, posing as Rigel, who is the son of Sirius Black, who is kind of famously more aligned with the good guys, winding up living in a dorm room with a bunch of the people who are on Voldemort's side, who are on Tom Riddle. We shouldn't call him Voldemort. On Tom Riddle's side, who are on the racism, mudblood, all types of stuff, right? So it's on the surface level of what everyone else thinks is going on. Interesting that Archie has to navigate this social, minefield, right?
Right.
And it's interesting for us as the reader and for Harry, because Harry is now begrudgingly becoming friends with the worst possible people for her to be discovered by.
Right.
Because if she was in Gryffindor and like Ron found out or whatever, he wouldn't tell on her. He wouldn't care. But with these people, we really don't know. Like, do Draco Malfoy and Pansy like Rigel enough that the friendship wouldn't be ruined if they found out that he was actually a she and a liar and a half-blood?
Yeah.
It's like, it's a big question mark kind of looming over the whole thing from very early on.
And something I also asked, which I guess could be considered a spoiler, but obviously, like, Draco still writes home. Like, that's just kind of a given. And his father and mother are, like, kind of expecting him to report on Rigel, who is his cousin.
Yes.
And kind of, what's going on with this mysterious black heir. And I love that even before he really has anything to lie about, like Draco doesn't know anything that he shouldn't know.
Sure.
And even so, he's not reporting back on even just small things that he could be. Because already book 1, we're seeing Draco value this friendship more than like appeasing his father.
So this is something I've thought about a lot, right? Because certainly an argument can be made this Draco's quite different from canon Draco.
Yeah.
But it's also because Lucius Malfoy in the original series is, though he still donates a bunch of money to people, so like people pretend to respect him. Like he was at least a suspected murderer. Right. He was a suspected terrorist. He got away with it all, but he's not very well regarded in society, and he picked the losing side. In this world, since the racists never actually formed a literal Ku Klux Klan and ran around trying to kill people, a lot of their politics are trending slightly more mainstream, and they've got a little bit more societal respect, unfortunately.
Yeah.
With that in mind, I imagine that Draco's upbringing would be slightly different because he's not being trained to be as defensive.
Not even defensive. They're not trading so much in fear. It's much more strategic and conniving than if you don't do what we say, we'll kill you.
Specifically with regards to, because I thought a lot about you, previously we talked about you being like, ooh, I don't know if I want to like Draco, because that's another character that you love to hate, right?
Right.
And I was thinking as I was rereading it, I wrote a lot, and we'll talk about it more later on. It's like there's bits where Draco leaps to defend Rigel's, quotation mark, ability in certain things, or his competency at certain things, and kind of puffing his friend up a bit. And you're like, okay, this is partially him liking his new friend, and seeing that his friend doesn't really defend himself very often and speak up for himself, but also that this is now a social asset to him.
Right.
His friendship to, I'm finding out that Rigel Black is very talented and very good at certain things. That is a social aspect.
Right. That adds to my character because I'm friends with him.
Already the Blacks are like a powerful family within this world who have become reclusive and removed from society. So having the black heir as my friend is a valuable social chip, but also I can see on the writing on the wall that this kid will probably be good at some stuff in the future and maybe important. So it's valuable to me to be able to inflate the value of this person that I'm connected with socially.
Right.
And like it's interesting because it means that Draco has a slightly different read on him.
Yeah.
Where he's nicer to people who are valuable to him.
Right.
Which then obviously you see even by the end of the first book, he's becoming a slightly better person just by his association with better people. As the books go on, he's still an asshole for quite some time.
I'm okay with that.
No, I think I mentioned to you previously something that's fun later on is that because he values his friendship to Rigel, since Rigel is friends with the Weasleys, he has to be polite to the Weasleys, as polite as he can muster. Like he doesn't like. You can tell that he doesn't like them still, but that he in deference to his friend, to try his best to tolerate them.
Yeah.
And there's stuff like that that's fun as the books go on. And then with Snape, it's really fun to see because in the original books, Snape is someone who's very pissed off with his own job.
Yeah.
Because like I am very calculating and specific, and I respect what I do, and I'm teaching a bunch of 12-year-olds who don't care and have no respect for the craft, right? So Harry, in this universe, is very, very good at potions.
Yes.
Which Lily was also pretty good at potions. We learned from Slughorn in the original books. So it makes a little bit of sense that this interest would have rubbed off. But again, the main reason the author has given her this interest, beyond just, I think, having something different to focus on other than just spell work, as the original books did, is because now we get into a situation where her biggest aspiration, she knows that her dad and Sirius occasionally make fun of Snape, and that Lily kind of defends him, but she doesn't know what really went down, right? She doesn't know the full story. So she wants to go to Hogwarts specifically because, in her mind, having read articles that he's written in like potions journals or whatever as a kid, that she thinks he's the best potions teacher ever. I need to go and study under him. That's why I really need to go to Hogwarts, because I want to be able to prove a point about Half-Bloods being able to do stuff. I'll go get an apprenticeship from the best guy in the world, then I'll be the best. I can go be the best potions mistress in Britain, and I'll be a Half-Blood, and won't that show them all? And it's really fun to get into Snape's head briefly and be like, and see, like, this is exactly what he's needed for his career of like someone who's actually talented and actually cares, who he can actually really train and get fulfillment out of as a teacher. God, if only it wasn't Sirius Black's kid.
Yeah.
The only thing that would be worse is if James Potter's kid, but at least I don't have to do that. And seeing Harry realize how poisonous that situation is and have to navigate it is really fun. And also see Snape have to figure out how to navigate his vitriol. Starting to like this kid against his better judgment, even though he still hates the parents, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And in some moments, having to separate the fact that this is a child from like just this is a child, they're going to make mistakes. Even though they are incredibly gifted and are very talented, this is a child and they're not on my level. I can't hold them to
You
such.
will see Snape lose his patience with Harry a few times as the books go on, because
I
Harry
mean,
continues to have big problems.
There were already some like slight ones,
like
but
the second major scene in his office where she freaks out and does a bunch of stuff.
That's exactly what I was thinking of.
Which we'll talk about as we actually break into the book a little bit here. But yeah, so as a point of reference, we're going to get into kind of some more detail about the specific books here. I already know that several people who have who watched our show have gone and read this, because a couple people have been talking to me in comments about reading it. I've seen at least, I think, 1 or 2 reviews on the fan fictions that specifically reference that I pointed them that direction, and they're on book 4, so they digested it pretty quickly.
Yeah, they move faster than me.
Well, to be fair, you started like a week ago, and that episode came out.
Oh yeah,
that episode came out, I think, like a month or 2 ago now.
Yeah.
It was definitely over, because there was a bit of a delay after that episode. So yeah, it's like 2 months ago now, but all the same.
Yeah.
So to kind of give people a heads up of what you're going to get into, if what we've been talking about here is interesting, or maybe you want to go listen to the even longer diatribe that I did in episode 12 of Uncharted 2. It's called Indiana Jacob and the Last Fan Fiction. You can find it pretty easily. I'm pretty sure it's episode 12. And it's like kind of the back 2/3 of that. I just talk about this in a lot more detail.
Yeah.
So if you want to hear a bit more before you go and commit to reading it, a few warnings. The first book is a little bit rough. We're going to talk about that as we talk about the book itself. I think Violet, it seems like from author's notes I've seen later on, she kind of agrees with that sentiment. But we're going to talk about, like, she was churning out like a chapter of that a week for a stretch. So it's like,
and they're not like short chapters. They're not.
Yeah. So it makes sense that they're a little dicey in spots. The first book, a bit difficult to get through. I will say the second semester of book 1, I think the quality jump is not a quality jump, it's a quality leap.
Yeah, it really is.
And book 2 maintains a very smooth like escalation from like going forward. The books they just get better. First book may be a little bit hard to get through. If I will say this, if you read fan fiction a lot anyway, it will not be trouble for you at all, because it's pretty high quality by the standards of fan fiction.
Absolutely.
It's just that if you generally kind of turn your nose up at fan fiction a little bit, it may be a bit tough for you to get through some of that early stuff, but I promise you the
after winter break, like going into winter break, which I love how they got the polyjuice potion.
We'll talk about that.
We'll talk more about that. But going into winter break, if you can make it that far, it's smooth sailing.
Absolutely, and it only gets better. The books get honestly, book 1's fun.
Yeah.
Book 2 and 3 are really good. Book 4 is like one of my favorite books I've read in the last several years, legitimately. It's quite good. But yeah, so if you want to go find these, the first book is called The Pureblood Pretense. The second is called The Serpentine Subterfuge. The third is called The Ambiguous Artifice. And the fourth is called The Futile Facade. Okay. The fifth is called The Malignant Masquerade. You can find these. I mean, if you find one of them, you'll find all of them on fanfiction.net. I would recommend you try your best to avoid reading the descriptions on each book until you've read the previous one, because they're not that bad, but a few of them like reference, after Harry dealt with that crap from the previous book, and because it's like, it's as if it's the back of the book description of the new one, but they're all just kind of there on the landing page. Right. So if you can, try and load directly from Google into the first book and navigate carefully as you go to each of them. Yeah, her little alliteration theme, some of them work pretty well. I like Pureblood Pretense, Futile Facade, and Malignant Masquerade. I'm kind of shaky on Serpentine Subterfuge and Ambiguous Artifice. They're good books. The titles are a little... I like that she's got at least a theme going on, at least. But anyway, the first book's a bit dicey, but they get quite quality after that. I will also warn you, they get quite long. Yeah. The fourth book is longer than the current Song of Ice and the current longest Song of Ice and Fire book, longest Game of Thrones book. And they're not too shabby before that. The fourth one is longer by a wide margin, but the other ones are not short by any stretch of the imagination. And Violet, I assume at least, her writing style is kind of, okay, I want to get to this next plot point, right? This is kind of the amount that I want to tell. Are there like 2 months of school content between those two? I guess I'll write 47,000 words for a chapter.
Right.
And so like book 4 is only 14 chapters.
Oh.
And it's
very boy.
Yes. So you may have a little bit, your typical like, I'll sit down and read a chapter of this before I go to bed. You may want to rethink that approach to these books.
I got in some trouble doing that myself, even with those last ones, is because the
last couple of Pureblood get pretty long, yeah.
Yeah, I was doing that. I was like, okay, I'm done scrolling for the evening. I'm gonna read a little bit and then I'll go to sleep. And I'm like, oh, it's been 2 hours. Oopsie daisy.
Yeah, some of these chapters get pretty long because it really does just feel like she goes like, I want to write this next narrative arc and release the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because like
which I appreciate, especially if I've been reading in real time. Like, would have super appreciated. And I don't really mind. I never complain about reading for a long time, but that's just like a big nerd.
Sure, yeah.
So
and I think most people's default mode with something like this is in bed in the evening on their phone. So it's just kind of a forewarning. I was reading this on planes last week, so I had plenty of time.
Yeah.
And nothing else to do. I just preloaded a couple chapters on the plane and I just went. But anyway, so we are going to talk about the first book a little bit more non-spoiler detail, and also there's mostly non-spoiler stuff in the Uncharted 2 playthrough. I'll warn you when we're going to get into actual spoilers if you want to stick around a bit more and you're like, this sounds interesting, but I'm not sure. So we'll sell you a little bit more on it maybe. But I think now we're just going to move into actually start talking about the Pureblood Pretense first book. Kind of some minor spoilers for the beginning. Aidan, wrote, like I said before, a lot of notes. I'm going to just so you can see. I'm going to pop open my notes app. Nope, those are my notes for Serpentine Subterfuge. Here's my notes for Pureblood. I'm just going to scroll, Aidan, and you can just...
Oh my goodness. I can see the little bar on the side. And
Oh
my goodness.
Now, to be completely fair, Aidan, a lot of what you're seeing here is me copy-pasting, like, a half a paragraph and then going, that's cute.
Okay.
So, a lot of it... Ooh, I just spit a little bit in your direction. I apologize. We're both vaccinated.
I don't think you made it that far, so we're good.
We're fine. But yeah, so I guess getting into it, one of my first notes here, and this is a good decent place to start, another kind of warning if you're getting into the first book, it makes sense. The first couple of chapters are really rushed, because it's like, you've seen this before, so...
We're not going to spend time here.
Yeah, like when the sorting happens, like McGonagall doesn't have any dialogue, it really montages you through everything you've seen before.
Right.
Which would feel a little awkward if you hadn't read the source material or seen the movies.
Yeah.
But,
so that is something, like, you don't necessarily have to have seen or be, like, intimately familiar with Harry Potter, but it definitely would add to your reading.
There's some
you don't have to be like a super fan, but you need to have at least seen the movie.
Well, so like I'm rereading it, right? And even on my first read though, I had precognitive abilities for a bit where they're at the table and mail comes in and Pansy from across the table goes, "Oh no, it's her." And before it even says she's reading a newspaper, I knew Rita Skeeter.
Yeah.
And it's like that type of stuff is like you're not going to get before, if you're not familiar with the source material.
Right.
I am going to talk some negatives about this. I hope, Aidan, you'll be able to pick up the slack on some of the positives for the front half, hopefully, since you loved it so much.
I really did.
I think especially for me the second time around, I could just see where it was spinning its wheels because I knew exactly where it was going. So I was like, this isn't that important.
So with me reading it, especially in such proximity to each other, I definitely, going through it the second time after like the just raw excitement had worn off a little bit, I noticed how much better the back half is compared to the front. And the front, I think, gets so loaded down by all of the exposition she's trying to give you and all of the world building, because there are some changes. While it's definitely the same world, especially with how she explains magic and how much detail she gives you about potions and things like that, it gets kind of stuck there, which I don't hate, but it could be improved for sure.
So I felt very similarly when I read it the first time. especially because it's fan fiction. I'm
Right.
like, am I some people may be surprised by this if they're longtime viewers and they watch our Kingdom Hearts stuff and they know the many rants that I've gone on about lore. But I've talked many times about, like, I don't care necessarily about having hyper-specific lore or vague lore as long as whatever they pick facilitates the style that they're going for, right? And to me, you can have a really vague setting, like the original Harry Potter, where there's not really a lot of hard and fast rules because that's what it's structured for, or you can have a story with a lot of really, really hard and fast rules. But I do see sometimes, like, fans going, I need to fix this because the lore of Harry Potter was too loose and I have to fix this or whatever. And there was a tiny bit of that later on where I was, where, like, I shouldn't even say fixing it, because honestly, it seems like it's fixing at first, but it proves to be crucial to what she's doing. Of, like, Harry, much later on in the series, there is a time turner involved.
Okay.
But it's, like, harsh restrictions on it. Only goes back 1 week, and there can only be there can only be 7 versions of you in existence at once. Or rather, if there are 7 versions of you in existence at once, you have to be less than 6. If you get to 7, then there are too many versions of your magical core in existence at once, and that 7th most recent version will hit like a resonance cascade that just will cause their magical core to implode and they'll die. So you can't use it too many times. And initially
within the same period of
And initially I was thinking, is this just her covering her ass on time turner stuff, because every fan is like, why don't we use the time turners to fix everything?
Right.
And it turns out that no, it is very, very crucial to the structure of the plot of the 3rd book.
Okay.
Which is what I was going to get into. Is in the first, when I was reading the Pureblood Pretense for the first time, and it was like, I'm going to explain how magic works and break into magical cores and scientific detail, and I'm like, oh no, is this going to be like a fan trying to just like, I really need to understand the lore of Harry Potter just for me, right? No. Yeah. As you discover, even by the ending of the first book, all of the details about how, when Snape is explaining how magical cores work, and even the spell where he demonstrates how to see a magical core, winds up being crucial to the construction of the first book's finale. So the reason that this author does so much detail on how magic works and the rules of magic and potion ingredients and stuff is because I initially was like, this is excessive. She does get better at delivering that information later on, but she doesn't deliver less of it, because you discover very quickly that if she's giving you a little information about how magic works or some potion ingredients, later on, either someone is trying to kill Harry with that thing, or she's got to escape from something with that thing. Maybe not literally kill, but like this, because I talked to you in an episode we recorded that will probably never come out, because this is kind of rough, where we were talking about this before you read the books. Right. One thing that I really, really admire about Violet is that I don't think she's a particularly good mystery writer compared to, like, because I mean, the Harry Potter books are mystery books, and ultimately I think JK's decent at writing mystery stories, even though she gets really obsessed with convoluted twists sometimes. But she's decent at it. Violet, I don't think, is particularly good at mystery stories, though, to be fair, some of the mystery aspects of her books are undercut by the fact that you can leap to conclusions because of your understanding of canon. I think she's a phenomenal suspense writer, which is especially, you see a bit of that even in the first book, and it's especially developed later on. And what's really crucial to the way that her books work is getting to her commitment. In the first book, we'll talk about, you can see kind of the skeleton of her style in the first book. No pun intended, broken wrist. But in the later books, she's fervently dedicated to getting her characters into trouble. This is something that's really difficult in writing, because whenever you get a character into trouble, you naturally have to figure out how to get them out. And sometimes the easiest solution is just other characters show up and save them, which is not terribly interesting. In her work, very frequently, she's absolutely, like, everything that can go wrong will go wrong. And the characters will either have planned for it, and that's part of their cleverness, or they will have to figure out a solution on the fly, and it will be a creative, inventive solution using stuff that you learned about previously, maybe even a book ago. And it's quite impressive the way that she constructs a lot of these situations that Harry gets into, honestly. And the other characters, because she does do point of view switches a little bit, where she jumps into other characters' perspectives, and other characters get into trouble sometimes too. Though mostly Harry is just in constant peril. Either of being exposed or literal peril. And that's something that is fun. In the first book, there's a little bit less constant threat to the ruse. There's a lot of, like, this is part of why I think that the first semester of the first book, the plotting is a little bit monotonous because really once she gets there, other than the broken wrist and a couple of other incidents, she doesn't have a lot of stuff getting in the way of getting away with it. She's pretty much like set.
Right.
No one's going to find out. In the later books, there are much more constant and consistent threats to her being exposed that have to be combated. Like, we're really, like, even a banal, like, section of the book about just her attending school has usually got something she has to deal with.
Okay.
Which I think helps with the pacing a little bit in the later books versus kind of the front half of Pureblood Pretense.
That's something I didn't actually think about until right now. So, kind of jumping a good bit ahead, really. Sure. Flint is a 5th year?
I believe so, yes. But he's held back.
Oh, yeah. So he's like a...
I think he's a 6th year, but he's 16, but he's in 5th year.
So he's going to graduate before Harry's done.
Yeah.
And not be a problem anymore.
Unless he gets held back again if Harry screws up his homework.
I hope not.
So as a point of reference, we're talking about, this is kind of a spoiler, but whatever, you'll find out pretty quick. An early problem that Harry has to contend with is someone who knows Archie, one of the only people that Archie seems to have a friendship outside of the Potter, Black, Remus Lupin circle, is Marcus Flint, who knows Archie and immediately figures out Harry is not Archie.
Right.
Doesn't know that she's Harry, just thinks that it's a pure-blooded, or rather deduces at least that it's a half-blooded boy who has swapped places with Archie.
So that and knows though that Archie's getting something out of it as well.
Yeah, so doesn't because he's friends with Archie, so he doesn't blow the whole thing.
Doesn't immediately blow the whole thing out of respect for Archie. But is like, if I'm keeping the secret, I'm getting something out of it. And
basically, he says, I was held back last year, and I don't waste my time doing homework and essays and crap. So you do it, which may seem like poor judgment on his part for getting an 11-year-old to do that. Yeah. But I think he's like, I don't care about the quality. I just need them turned in because I do know well enough on tests anyway. Because he's like, he is smart. He just wants to play Quidditch.
Right.
But what he probably didn't count on, and what Harry probably should have done the essays poorly, but she's an overachiever and a bookworm. She's kind of the Hermione of the story since Hermione isn't really in it. And so she does them too well.
I also love... I guess we're really getting into spoiler territory here.
Yeah, sure, whatever. We'll drift into spoilers now, and people can tap out whenever they want to. Hopefully they're interested. You should go read this. It's quite good, I promise. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
I really love that she was so determined to get into the library that she gets disguises.
This is so stupid.
Able to go into
she's such a good little character because she's such a nerd, and she's so like pathological about fixing stuff herself. She could have just talked to Snape or anyone and said, hey, can you like fix this problem for me?
Yeah, can you make me be allowed in the library, please?
There is very much an element to Harry running through her where sometimes she does not the easy thing. Yeah. Which is really the entire premise of the book, is her doing not the easy thing. Yeah. The whole series is her doing this kind of outlandish, ridiculous thing, because I guess we didn't mention, the books kind of don't mention it at first. I'll talk about this real quick. This is one kind of complaint I have about the first book, but I don't even know if it could have been fixed, is that what she's doing is supposedly an Azkabanable offense. Right. Now, on one hand, I'm like, maybe they shouldn't send an 11-year-old to Azkaban. They're probably like some kind of like age thing on that, where like maybe
wizard juvie.
Maybe you go wizard juvie for it, maybe, right? Yeah, so they don't tell their parents because they want their parents to have plausible. Also, because their parents are the ones pushing them to go to the schools they're going to in the first place. Sirius really wants Archie to go to Hogwarts for reasons. We'll talk about their relationship later. Okay. The letter that from the very ending of the book, which is like magnifique. Yeah. But God, Harry's like it's interesting. Like that, there's stuff what I like about the way she writes Harry is that Harry is very competent and very talented, but she still screws stuff up fairly frequently. She screws up just enough that she still feels human. And also, in addition to just making mistakes, she does stuff bad or wrong due to just like straight up character flaws. Yeah. I love there's that whole bit at the end, we'll talk about it more later, with the final kind of letter from Sirius towards the ending of the year, where it's like, Harry, what are you doing? You are like destroying this person. Yes. Just out of like her neglect, essentially. But anyway, talking about like the whole thing is that they're switching places here, and there's in this setting, because again, there's a much stronger sentiment towards, kind of leaning towards the bad guys here, because there was no big war, so their politics have not been put out on quite the same amount of blast as they would have been in canon. So in this world, blood identity theft is an Azkabanable crime, which is what Harry is doing by pretending to be a pureblood. This seems like a lot of risk to take on for what they're doing.
Yeah.
Now, on one hand, there was an aspect of the whole thing where like they kind of expected to be caught on the Hogwarts Express / at Heathrow Airport like immediately before the crime had even been commissioned. Like they half expected their parents to catch them,
right?
And it wouldn't work. On the other hand, I'm like, that seems like a lot of risk to take on. And you could go, maybe they're 11-year-olds and they aren't fully processing how bad that is. They're 11-year-olds and they've decided this is the most important thing in the world to the two of us.
Yes.
And that's believable. And part of the aspect of the books as they go on is the two of them kind of jointly going. This isn't even like a long-term spoiler because like one of the first exchanges they have in book 2 is about like, is this worth it? It's maybe getting out of hand. As it goes on, they're like, it'd be more difficult to switch back at this point. We'd be more likely to get caught.
Yeah.
I feel like if there had been a bit more pre-planning on the first book, because there's like I believe in like chapter 14 or something of book 1, there's an author's note from Violet where she's like, so like it's very telling about why the first book is the way it is, where she's like, sorry, this chapter took a whole week to get out. In other news, I've just finished outlining the whole first year.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, you know, well, to be completely fair, like she was clearly just writing this as like a hobby thing and didn't expect anybody to ever read it, you know. So
and that's mentioned several times in like the early author's note is like, I put out 3 chapters and oh my god, people are reading them. What the hell?
Yeah. So the later books don't have that problem. That's part of why the first semester is the way it is, because it's clearly she was just like coming up with it as she went along, so she didn't have like a structure yet. The later books are much more, even though they get longer, they're mostly all kill or no filler. Not really not a ton of fat to trim. And if there's fat, it's like usually like functional. It needs to be there for a reason. It's fun. I think it would have been maybe sharp to have like, because the whole first book, not the whole first book, in the back half of the first book, we find out about this legislation that Tom Riddle's party's trying to push through. I feel like maybe we could have remixed things a little bit where that doesn't get pushed through, but maybe they push through a law about anti-blood. Maybe there's an emergency law pushed through, like around Christmas vacation or something, because there's some kind of pure-blooded representative in the wizarding government, right? Who's a big ally for half-bloods and muggleborns, right? And this is a person who's like really a big member of pureblood, like a pureblood society person who's pushing for this stuff. But then it comes out that they were committing identity theft, or they were really a half-blood or something. And then there's like this quick, and like it's a big scandal. Maybe we find out, just to make it more logical that the law would get passed, we find out this guy isn't really a good guy. He was skimming money from charities or something, or whatever else. And this really adds a lot of fuel to Tom Riddle's party's fire. Of like, we got a lot of political capital now off of this guy.
Right.
And they push through blood identity theft has been upgraded from fine to you go to Azkaban. We got to root these people out. Right. And it's like, anybody who wants to come forward right now, come forward, they say, you know, in like the Parliament, but they're not offering that to, you know, Hogwarts, to Harry sitting at Hogwarts or whatever. And then bam, gavel drops, you know, it's over, right? But I don't know if that would have worked either. It was just something I was thinking about the other day of like, maybe it would have been better if like if this law had been introduced after they were committed, but also as the books go on, it becomes a really important aspect of both Harry and Archie's characters, of the two of them kind of reflecting on we only have ourselves to blame for this situation we've gotten ourselves into. So on the other hand, I really don't know if it needed to be changed. It's just a bit, it's one of those things where like, or one of my early thoughts is like, this seems like a lot of risk for her to take on, and the book is so lighthearted, especially at the beginning.
Yeah.
I don't know how much it fits.
In scenes like we've talked a couple times about the owlry scene where
Draco forgets his winter clothes at the very, very beginning. Kind of their first little like cute scene together of like, oh, they have a little friendship forming.
And I like the scene a lot, but it just feels weird. I don't know if
I felt like it should have been a bit later in the book.
Yeah. We've just had like an internal monologue on how Harry needs to make sure she's not making friends with the wrong people, and she's 100% sure that Draco is the wrong people. But oh no, he's cold.
Yeah, no, there's a couple of things kind of at the beginning of the book that are a little bit too cutesy like that.
Yeah,
they feel very fan fiction-y, but like it really, that stuff just like, I mean, obviously even in the first book that kind of stuff vanishes pretty quickly.
And I like the scene, and I think, like you said, if we just stuck it in there later,
if it was the end of the first week instead of like the beginning, even that would have been a little bit better.
I think it would have been, because it's not a bad scene, it just is in the wrong place.
a couple of things also, just especially early on, another kind of like fan fiction equality is the characters all kind of have very similar voices. There's not really a very clear distinction to the way different characters talk. You also have my biggest fan fiction pet peeve of all that I can't stand, which gets reduced later on, which is describing characters by their hair color. Yeah. The blonde said this, the brunette said that, that type of thing. The blonde did this.
Yeah. Really?
Oh, it drives me up the wall. I can't stand it, dude. You don't see that in real books. It's just a fan fiction thing of like, I need to diversify my language and like I don't want to keep using the same pronouns or the names, so I'll call them by like the blue-eyed boy said or the blonde girl said or whatever, and it's interesting. I don't know why it messes with me as much as it does.
I'll have to pay attention to that, and I wonder if it'll bother me after I pay attention to it.
It isn't in the later books nearly as much either. But no, there's also, especially because even though this author was a bit older than maybe the average age of fan fiction writers when she started it, she did start it in 2011. So there are bits of it where you will feel like you have gone back in time, and you may get a little bit of a cringe factor from that. But that's, you get over it. But yeah, just like, I don't want to talk too negatively about it because I really like this book. But I guess I'm doing it. I think anybody who's familiar with the show hopefully should know by now that I don't waste time talking about something too much unless I like it anyway. Right. So understand that all criticism of the first book is coming from a place of deep affection, and a lot of these problems are gone later on anyway, so I'm kind of just observing them. Yeah. And it's like we were talking about, like the first book kind of spins its wheels in Spot. Like they're really fun bits. Like I have here, it's like, so occasionally really fun bits. Pansy baits Malfoy into revealing that Snape fed him answers before class, like in that first week, because he's like answering the potions questions that Snape directs to him, and then Pansy baits him into saying, did Snape give you the answers beforehand, Rigel, like he did for Draco? And then Draco reacts, and she's like, ha, gotcha, knew it. And then similarly, like, so Harry has a lot of trouble doing magic initially. When she's when she finally transfigures something, and Draco's like, "How did you do that?" And she's just like, "Same way you did." I wanted
to poke you in an eye.
No, specifically, she says, he says, "How did you do that?" And she says, "Same as you, only better."
Yeah.
Because she's, I don't know, she's just like this really sarcastic little character. She only cares about efficiency.
So I kind of picked up on that scene for a different reason, where then it felt. The comment I made on it was, I love seeing 11-year-olds actually get to act like 11-year-olds. Where after she does successfully turn the match into a needle, and they're like, well, now we have to annoy you in every class. We're the key to your success. Yeah,
that's how it's going to work for you.
And I was just like, that is just so pure. That is so just friends being cute little babies at school. And I'm glad that we get to see some of this before everything gets deadly, like
things aren't too. I will say, huge chunks of these books are just like are basically social dramas and and Harry navigating being at the school and hiding her identity.
Right.
Because as the books go on, she has enough problems just keeping the secret without action and spells being flung around and killing and blood and whatnot. There is some of that later. Like I said, she's a very good suspense writer. Yeah. But we will, because even like the finale of this book is exciting, but it's pretty tame and relatively low stakes.
Because, so that, I did think that was interesting, especially that they were like, is this thing that's affecting all of these children put out by the parents of these children? And
I think the way the Malfoys react to it is just explicit confirmation, because they just give a very convenient interview, and then the second they find out Draco's life is actually in danger, they are flipped out and they are there. So it's like it seems pretty. Well, I'm pretty sure that in the epilogue they do say like it was set up. But,
I thought that was interesting, having again just instead of a mass murdering party, a strategic, conniving. How do we
discredit somebody? We don't need to kill people. Just decrease public confidence in Dumbledore.
And doing it with this magical, just letting kids hang out in their own mind, and they're asleep and no one can wake them up, but they're not in danger, they're just asleep.
Yeah, so the sleeping sickness, I believe, is a plot element borrowed from the first Alana the Lioness book as well.
Okay.
She kind of does this a couple times where there are a few MacGuffins that make transitions kind of in name only cameos. It's actually very Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy in that way. There's a couple of times, like there's kind of the main MacGuffin of book 3 is explicitly, like, it's the same name as the MacGuffin from the last couple of core Alana books. I say core because that author did those books for like 20, 30 years.
Oh, wow.
And there's like about like kids and other people set in that world. But the original Alana books, like kind of the core MacGuffin of the last couple of books of that is the MacGuffin of book 3 of this, but just functions very differently.
Okay.
I believe, I could be mistaken about this, I think that there's a magical staff in book 4, it's mentioned a couple times, that comes up later on, and I think it might be a reference to Alana, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
I haven't read those books. I've only read about them, so I'm not an expert in that field.
I know even less about them. It was interesting, a couple of the author's notes saying, if you're familiar with it, you'll recognize this character is kind of the same archetype as, these characters, which I kind of appreciated, even though I haven't read them, because I know if I had and I hadn't caught that, seeing that little author's note would be like, There is a character who's introduced in book 2 who becomes very important to the story, who is just a character from, not literally, they are an OC, they have a different name, they're a little bit different, but like they're like, if there was no author's note, anybody who'd read those books would like recognize the character instantaneously type situation. They fulfill kind of a similar narrative purpose too. But anyway. Yeah, and she says that like Snape is supposed to take on the like kind of mentor role from Alana and whatever.
It's very interesting what she does with Snape, because you've got this character who's like I was talking about, like, he finally has workplace fulfillment, essentially, has like a goal, but why did it have to be this damn kid?
Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting scenes later on with kind of his tension with the Marauders and his relationship with Archie, quotation marks, as the books go on. But other characters who show up, my next note on here, the books spontaneously, this is more for me, who was really on my reread, not as much on my first read, but on my reread, really struggling through the front half of this book. The book spontaneously gets much better when the twins show up at the beginning of chapter 7. Because they're quite well handled in this for the most part.
I think it's ridiculous, but I think it's the funniest thing that they refer to Rigel as puppy. Just puppy.
It's very. I think it's quite funny that they had that little nickname for her. Yeah. But so the Weasley twins we talked about previously. It makes. It's another thing where like you go, is this just here because these are fan favorite characters? Something I learned very quickly reading this is that she doesn't duck to fan service.
Yeah.
Because it makes sense for Fred and George to be so directly involved, because this is the son of Sirius Black, famous product developer for the Marauders line at Zonko's. So of course they need to be friends with her.
Right.
They worship the ground that her dad walks on. And so we also talked about, we haven't talked about it in this video, but you and I have talked about previously, and I believe in the Uncharted playthrough, about like how Hermione, obviously being a Muggleborn, would not be at Hogwarts, and I've been afraid starting it, she'll show up in Diagon Alley and spontaneously become best friends with Harry, and she'll somehow become heavily inundated with the plot. It's like, no, she's in America, she's friends with Archie, she's in 2 scenes.
Yeah. Well, and I think Archie's, other than, like, we only cut to Archie's perspective, I think, for those two scenes.
Yeah, for those 2 scenes. She's in the later books a little bit more, and I think I've already mentioned that the 4th book has a variation on the Triwizard Tournament, and she represents the American school. That's the only book where she gets substantial screen time so far.
Okay.
It's very, like, she gets enough that you get a sense of who she is in this universe, but we really don't cut to Archie very much, because Archie's half of the ruse is kind of smooth sailing.
Yeah.
Because everybody there just thinks he's a boy named Harry Potter, so there's no problem.
And I really, talking about the 2 POV switches, I really love the just, not subtle, but just kind of one line, troll in the dungeon, thought you should know.
So that I don't like, because that for me, that's one of the only really gratuitous fan service spots in any of the books.
I think if it was a pattern of that, it would bother me.
But it's just one little cameo.
Yeah, you can have a couple, and I just go, yes, I appreciate that you know the source material, and I'm fine with it. But I definitely, if it was inundated with that type of stuff, I wouldn't like it. But I was reading it in the car. I don't remember if we were
while driving, I hope.
No.
I'm kidding. No. I'm joking.
We were either on the way to or on the way from the grocery store, and I literally busted out laughing. And the driver was, they were like, "Are you okay?" Like, what? I was full-blown cackling, gut laughing, because it just caught me by surprise. And they're just like...
Maybe I didn't like it as much because I got spoiled on that specific joke on the TV Tropes page before I read it. So maybe for me, it was less of like, wow, that was surprising, and more of like, I got there and it's like, there it is. That might have been it.
So I didn't see it coming at all, and especially because it's not so inundated with those little call outs and whatever. I really didn't see it coming. I didn't even think about it. I was just like, I think he's gonna go in fire, or, oh no, please come help me. No, there's a troll in the dungeon. And it was specifically the thought you should know, because then he faints.
Well, he runs away. He doesn't faint, but
in the original,
yes,
that's why it got me.
No, I mean, I'm not above getting tickled by a little fan service. Obviously, just like I think I'm very on my guard with this type of stuff in particular.
Yeah.
But no, it's really, there's not much of it in these books at all that's gratuitous. When it does show up, it's usually appreciated. Speaking of gratuitous things, in my notes, I have something written down here. Hold on. Just to remind people the types of waters we are swimming in, Chapter 8 has to open with the author's note saying, "No, you degenerates, there will not be a romance between Harry and Snape." This is why I haven't been on fanfiction.net in 10 years. But yeah, I really like how she handles the Weasley twins. They don't feel like fan service. They feel like they should be there.
Especially the way she ties in Lee Jordan and everything.
Well, we'll get to that in a few minutes.
Okay.
Just because I'm trying to go. I have way too many notes for us to probably read all of them because I got too much. But
trying to go semi-chronologically.
I was talking about like how I really like how Harry as a character is like very obsessed with self-reliance, but also with efficiency, which he kind of doesn't care about like. It's like, if I need to do something, I'll just do what I need to accomplish it. This is kind of an extreme example, and I don't think she really does anything quite like this later on, but there's a bit where she throws something at somebody to get their attention, and then says, "Draco, I told you to get his attention, not throw something at him." It's like, just like, it doesn't, she doesn't care, she just wants to move things along.
I liked that
and that's very, like, that extreme of an example isn't really common to her character later on, but, like, that is very much her attitude towards things in the books. There's a lot of really strong characterization for her even early on like that. First kind of bit where she has a scene with Snape.
Okay.
The first, like, because part of my problem going through it was, no, not the welcome speech.
Oh, okay.
Like, in his office, after class. Because for me, like, the fact that she goes through, like, basically the entire week procedurally, like, there is important detail there about, like, Harry's having difficulty doing magic. She's navigating these new relationships. But, like, for me, you don't have, like, a really, I guess, especially this is, again, on reread. I probably didn't feel this way the first time I went through it. And I'll defer to you on how you felt about it, obviously.
Okay.
For me, I wasn't like, oh, yeah, I'm getting into this again until she was in Snape's office. And she was trying to convince him of the sincerity of her interest in the subject.
Yeah.
Right? Like, for me, because it's like, you get to that scene, it's like the first week of school is kind of covered in intimate detail, but we don't really get to Harry actually getting Snape's attention until the potions classes on Thursday and Friday. And when we do get there, we get really strong Harry characterization. We get action taken towards her specific goal. In fact, like, her overall objective of getting taught by this guy.
Right.
And you need characters taking action towards things, and there's not a ton of that in the first week, really. And actual scenes with Snape, who's pretty important, and also a victory for Harry, other than just getting to the school, which she does kind of by default at the beginning of the book. She hasn't had a lot of, like, wins.
Right.
So we get to see her fight for something, achieve a victory by convincing him of her sincerity, her sincere interest in potions, that this isn't just Sirius Black's son being put up to screw with him.
Right.
And then also, on top of that, we get new objectives of now, what's next? Now I have to do this. Now I have new assignments from him. Now I have to, now that he has my, at least, belief, I have to go and impress him. And now I have to start doing this new stuff with him, right? And that's where it feels like the book really kind of gets moving a bit more. And I feel like she doesn't even get, like, the whole wrist breaking. She doesn't get her wrist broken until after that. It's like the whole hazing, like, aspect of it doesn't start until after that either. I don't know if, like, bumping that up into first week would have been appropriate or not, but it just, I don't know. I feel like that first week needed to be compressed, and we needed to get to that scene faster.
I definitely don't think when you say hazing, you're talking about the Rookwood and...
but I was mainly thinking about Lee Jordan, which I guess is really more an attempted assassination than it is hazing. But I was thinking about Lee Jordan going after her first.
Because I think the Rookwood stuff really caught me by surprise. I didn't expect something like that, but once you kind of find out, like, hey, we're protective of Pansy, and if you're going to be friends with her, you need to pass our judgment. I liked it a lot. And I liked, I think she kind of mentions, like, internal monologue. They sent me into the Forbidden Forest, but then they followed me to make sure I didn't actually die.
That bit reading through that, I was like, you two are... I mean, I knew that they followed her, but I was like, what are you two, like, almost adults doing with this 11-year-old?
Yeah.
And I was like, the characters of Edmund Rookwood and Alden Rossier, however you say their names, two of her OCs, based on, like, I believe her justification in universe is, like, their parents, I think those surnames exist, they were, like, Death Eaters, but in this universe, they would have had kids, because they, go to Azkaban or whatever, right?
People.
I think that those two characters... I understand what she's trying to do with those characters more later on. In the first two books, I was very concerned by the... I was not concerned. I was very confused by the purpose of some of her OCs. I understand what they're about later, but it's that some of their actions in the first book, I was like, I don't know how much this fits with their later characterization, but whatever. No, like that, even that bit, I have a note later on where I was like, I wrote as it was happening, like, this scene is insane. What's the purpose of this?
Yeah.
And then at the end of it, I was like, oh, wait, right, they heal her wrist. Actually, this is important.
Yeah.
Because we have to fix the wrist problem. And these two, having gone through this with her, now are not going to snitch.
Right.
Like, they'll just do it because they feel like they got something out of it.
Knowing that you have secrets makes you more trustworthy.
The characters in these books don't stop spouting like insane platitudes for another book and a half or so.
I don't even know if this is a fair comparison, but they at least don't bother me as much as the ones in frickin' Kingdom Hearts.
Let's not even go there right now. Let's not even go there. No, at least what Alden says there kind of makes sense.
Right.
Like knowing that there's something to you, because you're not just like this generic nothing. Knowing that there is something to you below the surface means we have a better understanding
right.
of you.
And the fact that after they throw out the platitude and Rigel's like, what did you just say? We get some explanation.
Yeah.
We don't just have to take it and go, thanks, what do I do with this? And I do appreciate that. And I want to chalk some of it up to the good breeding, I'm doing air quotes, good breeding and social cues and all of the BS etiquette that like these pureblood children are taught. And so this is like how they speak because this is how their parents speak, and you can't say things directly. You have to, yes, I'm doing well, and the weather is quite nice.
There's certainly a bit of that. I think Violet gets a lot better at navigating that as the books go on, because one of my biggest problems with the hardest I cringed in the first book, going through it the second time, it wasn't as bad because I was expecting it. First time, every single scene where pureblood adults show up, my eyes were rolling out of my head. Specifically,
the only pureblood adults we really see are Draco's. We do see Pansy's
so the whole scene on the Hogwarts Express where they're talking with Pansy's parents and Draco's parents, kill me. Like,
really?
It's just, I don't know, like it's like everybody has the exact same speaking voice, and it's all like they're all just talking in circles, and it's very overly. It feels like someone trying to punch up towards fancy dialogue, you know what I mean? Like they're trying overly hard to make it fancy and formal instead of just having like these people just talk like human beings.
To me, it really, and this is such a weird, like, I'm not sure where in my psyche it found this to connect it to, but what I thought about while I was reading this was they made, when American Girls like kind of got popular again for a little bit, they made movies starring the main
dolls or whatever.
So they're tangent here. There are two lines of American Girls. There are the ones that look like you, and then there are the characters.
Okay.
And so for the characters, each like named girl got a movie. And I think it was Samantha's movie takes place like while like kind of I guess pre like Revolutionary War, like right into the Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
And there's this big scene where she gets invited to somewhere, I don't remember where, and she's like friends with the daughters, but she knows that her parents and their parents don't like each other. And they make a big thing about when she's like served tea, instead of accepting her tea, she flips her cup over and puts her spoon on top of it and says, "Thank you, but I shall take no tea." And they make a big thing out of her like learning how to do that politely to express her politics.
Yes.
But also like not being a dick about it. And that was what it really made me think of, is all of this like circular, like these adults talking to children and having to be like, yes, I would like to formally ask you to be friends with your daughter. that was where my brain went. I was
Sure,
like,
no,
Nelly drinking tea.
It makes logical sense to me. And here's the thing, like Violet's like creative decision making with these characters and their personalities stays the same. She just gets better at writing the raw dialogue for these types of scenes. Yeah, like the main thing for me is like also that scene is like mostly a recap of stuff we know. Yeah. And like it is so long because they talk so circularly about it. It's like there's a lot of time being spent here going through information I know, and the characters biting around and not wanting to say stuff and getting it dragged out of them, and it's like, just move on, please.
Yeah. That was one thing that happened a couple times, like rehashing all of the letters. Like I felt like we did a good amount of it. It felt like when you get like here's what happened last time on an episode of something. Yeah. I felt like we got that in the book several times.
Later on, if there's ever a lengthy recap, it's because Harry
we are lying.
Has to lie a lot. Yeah. There's after the finale of book 3 in particular, Harry has to do just a crap ton of lying. Okay. A lot of stuff goes down, and she has to do big lie. Yeah. And see, in those, because there are a couple of those, and I get that's why some of the letters we have to see the entirety of so that you can see some of the lies. And that bothers me less because that's why we're seeing them, is that we're in on the lie being told. But when that's not the case, it's just, I agree. It's like, okay, come on. Can we keep doing stuff? Especially because the other parts are so good that you feel even more stuck because you're not getting. I want to get to what happens next. Yeah, I want the good stuff. This is completely unrelated to anything, but I'm just scrolling through my notes here. I got to bring something up to you. The thought occurred. Okay. How does Professor Binns grade assignments? Because he's a ghost. Poltergeists can move things. Ghosts can't. Does he have like a TA who turns the pages on essays for him? That's their whole job? No, they're rolled, so he'd have to like hold the scroll. He has a TA who just manages paperweights for him. And then writes and then he dictates. Maybe he has a dicto quill or whatever. I guess those probably work for ghosts. Yeah. The dicto quills get a lot of play in this. Yeah, because we don't know handwriting charms yet. Yeah. And there's also just talking about getting onto the good stuff. Like there's just a lot of stuff later on. These really are procedurals of her hiding her identity and getting around stuff. But there's bits in this where just like it feels like unearned details and not that important. Like there's one that just gets sometimes it gets on for too long. So like for example, after she breaks her wrist, right, and she's trying to hide that. There's a bit where she's like, it goes into too much detail about like. We was going to go to the Great Hall, and normally she wouldn't eat pasta, but she needed the carbs. And it's like, I don't need to know that. I don't need to know what her normal diet is versus her diet right now versus I don't need that. Like, let's skip past that a little bit. And so in that vein, though, being like, yeah, I thought about eating meat, but I didn't know if I could actually commit to eating meat for 7 years, and also me being a vegetarian explains me being scrawny. Like, that detail I was fine with. But then you're right when she goes into, well, I'm healing, so I should eat differently. And that gets that kind of stuff again. Like the style. This again when I said like the skeleton of the style is all here because you have stuff like the little plot line about we find out eventually Lee Jordan, who in this continuity his parents had a joke line. They got shut down because the Marauders sold better. Family went bankrupt. He's really upset and he is attacking. He's attacking Archie as some kind of like misguided revenge, basically, right? And this is kind of the mystery of the first semester of who is attacking Harry. Because initially it's kind of innocuous. Then someone almost poisons her with acid. Yeah. And it's like, this is escalating very sharply. Yeah. So stuff like that, where like one thing that I really like about Violet's style is that she doesn't really do like, there's dramatic music, something bad is about to gonna happen. Harry will be walking down the hallway, and then someone will show up and try to kill her, and guess what? The finale just started. Yeah. You know? And I really like that, because in real life, you don't get foreboding music when someone's coming after you. And since so much of it is characters talking, and Harry she certainly gets into misadventures, but not quite as many as canon Harry does. Especially like smaller ones. Yeah, because she's got quite enough going on without them. That when it does pivot so harshly, you really feel that impact. And it gets, like, because the books are mostly kind of tame and it's just characters talking, when you get very suddenly, Harry just broke her wrist after falling down the stairs, and that's one of the tamer types of really, like, kind of swerves into violence that happens in the entire series. That I really think it hits pretty well. But it really is just kind of the bones of the style are there, not quite fully developed until the later books, because Violet's trying to be very procedural about the issues that Harry's encountering, but she's sometimes picking the wrong details, and sometimes dodging details that in the later books I know would have come up. So, like, for example, there's another bit where she falls through a trick stair, and dung bomb gets thrown at her and she smells, right? So Draco and Pansy help kind of wash the smell out of her hair and stuff like that, right? And it's like, wouldn't the robes need to be washed too?
Right.
And wouldn't the left hand that's currently wrapped up in bandages that she's trying to conceal have been discovered during the process of that? In the later books, Violet would not have made a mistake like that.
Yeah.
The dung bomb thing wouldn't have happened, or figuring out some way to conceal her wrist as well would have been a factor. Or, like, she wouldn't have been able to ask her friends for help because she knew they would have found the wrist or something like that.
Yeah.
There's little bits like that.
She'd have to go take a bath with Benny in the kitchen.
Yeah, there's a little bits in like that in the first book.
Yeah.
That, like, there's like things that either details that she wouldn't have gone into or details that she wouldn't have missed in the later books. But, you know, it's to be expected because she's still kind of she's developing as a writer, and it's getting. I hate talking about her like this because I'm sure. I'm not sure. I hope Violet will listen to this because we're gonna. I hope we're probably gonna have to do multiple episodes about different later books. This book we're gonna cover in one episode. The later books, maybe we can cover two in one episode, but probably we'll have to split it into two. By the time we get to 3 and 4, it's going to be multiple episodes per book. And when we get caught up, we can do one episode per chapter of book 5 as it gets published. Or, you know, whenever we feel like sitting down to record, like, you know, two chapters have come out. Let's do an episode for both of those or whatever. And so I hope maybe fans of the series will maybe find it, and maybe Violet will find this. And I hope us being critical of the first book is not too difficult for her to hear, and that she will stick around until we get to the fourth book, where it will be literally nonstop gushing praise from me, not kidding, for probably 6 hours across multiple episodes.
Right.
But, like, so I almost feel a little bit bad talking about, like, kind of little mistakes she made in 2011, you know. But it's just this is almost me more like, maybe there's someone out there who wants to write, and I mean, I've been inspired a lot by reading these, honestly.
Yeah.
But I feel like, you know, it's worth it to talk about kind of where issues come up, and we can all hopefully learn from them a little bit.
And I think, on that vein, though, I think it is important to note that while there are issues and while there are places that it could be improved, it's still pretty dang good.
Yeah, I was really pleased because when I was rereading it, I was like, oh, this is a slog. I hope Aidan's having a good time. And then you texted me, and you're like, this is amazing. I love this. I'm gonna try and find some of the stuff you texted me, but you go ahead and you talk for a second while I try to find your texts.
One thing that I did want to a little bit bring up, kind of going back to, like, the characterization, and I hate that she's made me like Snape.
Yeah.
The speech that he gives at the end of chapter 3, like, I could hear that in Alan Rickman's voice.
Oh yeah.
And it just, I so thoroughly, like, these are I mean, obviously it's two different stories, but these are two different Snapes. And I don't think that I don't hate that. I think I thought I would, and I don't at all.
Well, it's one thing that's really interesting about this Snape is since Lily Evans is still alive, what's his deal? Because you get a little scene where they kind of parallel the scene from the original book where Harry overhears a conversation between Snape and Quirrell, where he's threatening Quirrell, and it's like, he seems to be in on whatever's up, right? But in the original story, he would have been in on it, but also helping Dumbledore. But you're like, in this universe where Lily Evans isn't dead, is he just on the bad guy's side or not? Like, we don't know. And it's we don't know how different this character is or isn't really. And it's also even beyond that. Yes, you're right. Like, there is a bit of different stuff because she has to change Slytherin very slightly as, like, an institution to make it not as insane.
Right.
Or rather, at least she leans into how it's described by, like, the Sorting Hat in canon, but not how people act in it in canon.
Right. And I like the couple of things where it's like, maybe people think Slytherins are jerks because they act like that to other people, but within our own house, we actually all love each other.
Well, we don't love each other, but at least we don't backstab each other.
Right.
Within here, we work as a unit. We don't. You have to ask for help. You won't be given. You have to ask for it. But once
you ask,
as long as you don't f with anybody else in here, we don't. You know, you're not supposed to do that.
There's no infighting within my snakes.
Anyway, here we go. Here's the text from Aidan a week or two ago. I hate that I don't hate Snape. I really despise the good freaking characterization, which is certainly a thing. And just really all the Slytherins. 100% over any reservations I had about Harry being a girl. I love Rigel/Harriet. I love her. I want to pat her little head. That was what I typed into search in my text. I just typed in pat her. I was like, I know I'll find it that way. But I really think that there's a lot of interesting character stuff going on in these, and I was very glad when you said you were enjoying it as much as you were, because I remembered liking it but slogging through it. Mm-hmm. And so I was really concerned going through it a second time. And, anytime you're like showing a friend something you like, and you're like, are
they gonna like it?
Yeah, you get really nervous. I think especially going through it, and I was having such a hard time going through it a second time. I was like, ooh, is she gonna like it? I do think, I will say this, I've been afraid when I was rereading it. I was like, I don't think I will ever do a third read of this book. I think if I ever want to go back, I'll probably start from 2. I can now say with confidence, I will start from second semester.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I ever need to.
That's what I was about to say.
I'm not sure I ever really need to read the first semester of Pureblood again, unless I want to go back and like check a specific thing, just like reference.
Right.
But if I ever do a reread,
there's a bunch of like potions, ingredients.
Well, I meant more character stuff, but yes. Usually they if there's an important potions ingredient recipe, they'll recap you on it. But but like, so for example, I have here chapter 10. Almost halfway through our 22 chapter book, though to be fair, the last 4 chapters are much longer than the others. We are on weekend 1 of the school year. It's kind of a dense first week. A lot happens, but still, it's indicative of a lot of kind of structural problems with that first book. But anyway,
one little phrase that I made a note about that while we're talking about itty bitty stuff, Harry's green eyes are described a couple times. And I didn't notice it until the second read. But the first time we have to do something about your common green eyes. And then when they're talking about the legislation and like, is it true that her eyes are as green as a serpent?
Yeah, I don't know why they were called common, when later on she really zeroes in on them being vibrant in the books. That feels like he was being sarcastic or just like a mistake. I'm not sure what's going on with that in chapter 1.
I didn't know. Well, the being like, oh, green as scales was when they're talking about the legislation,
and that was like crazy pureblood people exaggerating as well. But for example, an issue later on in the series is when they start doing much longer term subterfuge that involves like modified polyjuice potions, she calls it, and other things where she doesn't have to wear gray contacts anymore. Her eyes actually change to match Archie's gray.
Interesting.
When she's at home, she has to wear green contacts instead. And it's specifically commented eventually by Lily that it looks like the kind of color of your eyes is kind of dimming a little bit. Like it's coming a slightly duller green.
Interesting.
So no, I was very weird in that first chapter when he said your common green eyes, because later on they zero in a lot on how vibrant her green eyes are. It was a kind of a weird little thing there. Speaking of Archie talking to Harry, though, the next note I had in chapter 12, I think probably most of my notes are going to be pretty positive from here on out, honestly, because the book gets a lot better as it goes on. Chapter 12, Harry gets a letter from Archie and reflects on how bad they are at pretending to be each other. When he says something about missing him as Harry writing to Archie, quotation marks, says, "No matter how annoying I find you." And it's like that's him role playing as Harry, right? Like that's it's kind of cute that's how Archie processes their relationship. Like clearly she doesn't feel that way, but like that's just how he feels. Like that's her outer like.
Right.
I'm allowed to say this because I have Asperger's. Harry reads like she has Asperger's.
Yeah,
it's like
a little bit
extremely narrow fields of interest and focus. Difficulty parsing social cues.
And it has like talking about the words. Aidan, spit them out. I only want to do potions, so why do I have to do everything else? Like that very much felt like people that I have known. Like
not me though, not like me.
I was specifically thinking of a different person. But
no, I was just joking. Draco's obviously pretty different, but even him being encouraging and supportive, that's what I was talking about before. Like, so when he's being formally introduced to Alden and Rookwood, right? And it's like, they're saying it's pretty difficult to get a potions mastery. Draco insists Rigel is up to the challenge, right? He's legitimately impressed by her ability that he's seen so far, but also it's important for him as a character to surround himself with persons of consequence. He's upping his social stature in the eyes of these upperclassmen, and the value of his friend Rigel by boosting their confidence in his abilities or whatever. It's also cute that Harry blushes a tiny bit when he says that, because she's not like, she doesn't get tripped up very much by that type of stuff, but like cause she has very little confidence in herself on anything other than her potions ability.
Right.
But even bits like that, there's tiny bits where her even though she knows she's good at that, like she still has doubts and confidence issues. Like there's a bit at the very beginning of book 2 where she's talking to the guy who runs like the main apothecary in Diagon Alley, where she's like, I promise I'm a good brewer. And it's like, especially I, having read all the books and knowing more about her and about the guy who runs this apothecary, she's been walking into his store since she was like 8 and like showing a like already like much higher than adults level of understanding of the quality of ingredients and how potions are made. So like her assuring this guy who's known her for years, I promise I'm good at brewing potions. The fact that she has that little confidence and his ability to infer anything is like really funny and telling about her as a character. A lot of the social maneuvering stuff in the first book is awkward, but it works when it's telling us about the characters. A lot of the social stuff works better in the way, but like, so for example, right after that scene with the upperclassmen, Pansy introduces Rigel, and then after that she says, now we only have to hope that Alden and Ross will write their parents about you. If that happens, their mothers will write to my mother and Draco's mother, and will practically be ordered to be friends with you. It's like, it's cute, because she does note afterwards that they wouldn't have dropped Rigel even if the whole house hated him. So like we know that they're not fake assholes, but like but that it makes things easier, and that's what they value, and that we learn something valuable about the characters there. You know, that she insists we wouldn't have dropped you anyway, but it makes our lives a lot easier this way. This is more just a line that I'm sure most people who are fans of the books will remember anyway. I wrote this down mostly for me, but I'm going to read it anyway because it's a very important line. Rigel resigned herself to a life of friends and acquaintances. At the rate she was earning new ones, she'd never be able to get rid of all of them. It's a very, very important arc line. Like, just, well, I mean, obviously, even in the first book, of like, Harry's life would be so much easier if nobody cared or noticed her, if she was completely anonymous. By the end of the first year, she has thwarted a potential terrorist attack. And everyone knows that she's a freak. So
everyone knows, hey, this little Slytherin first year was in my brain. Like,
they don't understand, like, not all characters understand that what she did is like
they don't
impossible.
They don't understand the gravity of it, of like why it was her. Like, it wasn't just her helping out. She was there because literally no one could do it other than her. And
by the end of it, a lot of characters also know that she's literally like having a trial apprenticeship with Snape or whatever. So it's like, you know, people are like picking up on like this. She's drawn more attention than I think she bargained for.
Right.
And it's a really interesting thing with Harry throughout all of these books, where like she is consciously aware of the fact that if she like cut people out of her life, her life would get way easier. But she just keeps being friends with people and keeps making new friends.
Oh no, I have to go talk to my friends because I've been hiding in the library for 2 weeks.
In my disguise, because I'm so stubborn and dedicated to solving problems myself that I didn't get to the step of I should just ask Snape to fix this for me. Which I don't think that happened. I don't think she gets it fixed until book 2. I think it's like midway through book 2 where Snape's like, "What are you doing? What?"
I just assumed it was never going to be. I just assumed this was the plan
It gets fixed eventually. Eventually Snape is like, "What are you doing, you idiots? Why are you like this? Every week it's something new with you. God, I'll go fix this."
You mean to tell me that your wrist was broken for half the frickin' semester and you didn't tell anyone until now?
That's also part of like the whole wrist breaking thing, is like that. To be fair, it wasn't broken for half the semester because I forgot that the two upperclassmen do fix it after a couple of weeks. But like she didn't tell anybody about it.
Right.
But like that is a thing where like that almost feels, how do I put this? Violet is very dedicated to giving Harry problems to surmount, and sometimes their problems are like, how is she going to fix this? But she does figure out a solution. The wrist thing almost feels like too much. Like in the later books, I don't think she would have given Harry something that permanent and hard to hide that Harry didn't have a solution for.
Yeah.
Like obviously in this book, eventually upperclassmen who know better healing magic than the Weasley twins do fix it for her. But later on, like, and so obviously a broken wrist wouldn't have mattered later on because Harry also starts learning healing magic.
Right.
But, or maybe it would have mattered, but.
It is less consequential.
The point is, like, in the future, something that is that difficult for her to get around would not have also been something that she had such a loose, like, I just will keep my wrist in my sleeve and hope no one notices, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to turn the air conditioning down a little bit because it's getting a bit warm in here, and normally when we're recording Let's Plays and stuff, I like to have it off if we can, but this is a podcast and there's no extra game audio in the background, so people can put up with a little background noise. They will simply deal with it.
I keep wiggling a bunch, and I'm like, I hope it's not picking up every time I shift my weight to pop a hip or something.
I hope it's fine. Oh well.
I guess we'll find out.
We have a slightly different audio setup than normal, so the mic may be a little bit bugged by the cushion. So anyway, let's talk about the scene that you texted me about this is amazing, the second major Snape and Harry scene.
I think that's the one I'm looking at, because I was like,
Please continue with whatever your note is that you have here.
Yes, I am awake at 4:30 a.m. So this is what we were talking about when the later chapters get a little long, and if you are in bed and you're like, I'll just read a chapter before I go to sleep, and then you text someone at the text sent at 4:45. I think I started typing at 4:30. You'll be awake longer than expected because you won't want to stop reading in the middle of the chapter. I really like so you had kind of told me she goes into, like, here's how magic works, and it can feel kind of, oh, you're just doing this for, like, your own gratification, but then
you discover
that when you really get there, it's freaking cool. But I initially, because I kind of went into it knowing this isn't just frivolous, I like the conceptualization of how magic is stored within a being. Like, I just think that's really neat. A lot of series that I have read or seen don't usually explain it. They're just like, you either have it or you don't.
Like, she contextualizes now in her fanfiction of, like, squibs have underdeveloped magical cores. It's like, it's essentially like a birth defect.
Okay.
This is something that gets talked about later on, where it's like they do have more magic in them than muggles, but not enough to really be able to generate any magic themselves.
Interesting. So the only other, like, how magic is made that I could think of was an anime where it's like smoke. Like, you have extra veins, and you have your blood veins and your smoke veins. And
interesting.
Yeah. And this is way cooler. This makes so much more sense than that did. Boy, let me tell you.
I won't get into it too much, but Violet having a very firm understanding of the, shall we say, science behind how magic works in an individual becomes crucially important, not just to like events and scenes and Harry's abilities or whatever, but like to like the plot.
Oh, interesting.
By the time you get to book 4,
I mean, it was already pretty important to the plot.
Yes, yeah, you're right. You're correct. Sorry. Okay, let me rephrase that. Understanding a magical course is very important to the climax. I have to solve the problem of this book. Later on, it becomes like very big picture, overarching narrative of the series. Some stuff becomes involved in a way that's like I'm probably overselling it. We'll talk about it when we get there in book 4. It's like it kind of just it doesn't matter. We'll talk about it more. I probably shouldn't even open my damn mouth. Let's keep talking about the scene where Snape says, Rigel, you're not doing well in your other classes. I hear you're neglecting your studies because Harry can't perform magic.
What happened was, apparently Harry had some magical mishaps as a child and was like, screw that, I'm shutting down all of my magic, not doing it anymore. And like very much repressed her magic and bottled it up and didn't let it out.
Yeah, it's mentioned that her incidents of accidental magic were extremely few and far between, and they were only when she got really, really, really upset about something, and they were very violent, and it just made her kind of more scared about it and didn't want to do it anymore.
So because then her magic is so hella super repressed, one, her own magic gets stronger to fight her oppression of it, and 2, because she has it locked down so tight, when she goes to get a wand, she doesn't have ambient magic to connect with a wand.
So Ollivander can't find something for her.
Yeah, so she gets kind of a bad match wand.
He gives her something that basically Snape explains it's like just very he says well balanced, but basically it's like low conductivity essentially, where it's like
Yeah.
she was blowing everything up when she was trying other ones, so he got her something that was not very reactive, basically. Which means that she's like trying to shove magic through this thing, it's not working. Mm-hmm. Also, it's just not for her. Obviously, the Holly wand with the Phoenix Phoenix feather is.
Yeah, I didn't even think about... I just was kind of like, okay, whatever, you don't have to have that wand because you're probably not going to get just in a fist fight with Voldemort because Voldemort's not going to get in a fist fight with a child as a politician.
Yeah, but, hopefully not, at least.
Yeah.
Be punching down a little bit.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens with that Holly wand later on.
Yeah, and now that we've switched wands, obviously it's going to,
But yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, you texted me about, like, how you don't really like, maybe it's just, not even like you hate it, like, on principle, but it's, like, it's kind of overused, the trope of, like, trauma making you stronger.
Right, yeah.
Because sometimes it's like, sure, sometimes trauma can make you stronger, but oftentimes it's a real problem that festers and you have to deal with it.
And just from personal experience, kind of surface level, there are things where I'm like, I'm absolutely a stronger person. I like who I am because of these things. Like, I learned things about myself and what I'm capable of and how I can handle things very early. And I have a lot more confidence in some areas because I hit a brick wall and made it to the other side. And then there are other things where it's like, you're faced with that brick wall and having seen it screws with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And that usually does not result in strength. Mm-hmm. And I think so often in these, well, trauma made me stronger stories, the other side is completely ignored. Mm-hmm. And I don't... This wasn't so heavily on the, like, toot my own horn, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger bus that, like, I was super bothered by it. And I think there is enough of the reluctance shown of, like, I am kind of afraid of my own magic. I'm having to ask my magic. Like, I can't say that I want the spell to happen until right when I want it to happen, because if I think about doing the spell the whole time I'm casting the spell, then something's going to explode. Like, there was enough that I wasn't actively mad at it, but it did just kind of trip that little wire of, like, you better tread carefully, Miss Ma'am.
So yeah, you said you weren't even sure if you wanted to bring this up on the show because it was not really that big of a problem. I wanted you to bring it up because I'm very interested to see how you respond as some of these ideas get developed further in the later books. Okay. I suspect you will be quite pleased.
Okay, cool.
But
I've been quite pleased so far.
No, but I mean
in general.
I mean even with this specifically.
Yeah,
because
I think if it gets brought up again, it might be handled a little bit better.
It goes on for a bit. We kind of mess with this. I mean, I shouldn't say it goes on for a bit. I mean, this is like, obviously it's going to be core to who Harry is. Mm-hmm. But I think it's respectful of the fact that, like, just something bad happens to you doesn't make you stronger, and it's just like a little thing in your backstory, and bam, it's done. It's like, no, you have to be able to deal with, you have to be able to process bad things that happen to you.
And that was kind of something I scrolled down to see the end of the message that I sent here, where I was like, if we could get a little bit more of, like, the other side, and we kind of do with Sirius, and, like, Sirius and Archie go through a bad thing with Sirius's wife and Archie's mom dying, and Sirius gets, like, super reclusive, super, like, doesn't go out into society, and we kind of
whereas Archie seems to be turning it into a strength of, I'm going to go and pursue this interest single-mindedly and relentlessly.
Kind of that, we have, like, a good balance there. Or I didn't know if, like, Archie having gone through something similar, and we don't necessarily see, like, he has a strong, passion for healing, but he's not necessarily, like, a stronger willed person. And so that kind of balances some of it out as well, where it's not like, oh, we have a bunch of, like, traumatized children walking around and now they're super special.
He didn't get super healing powers because because he watched his mom die.
Right.
Yeah. Really minor thing, I will say, just again from kind of a writing, I really shouldn't criticize too much. I wrote a lot of notes about, like, kind of issues I had with the writing that I really shouldn't even bother with because I still think this book's good and the later ones are so much better. It's like, I did find a little bit weird that, like, that within the structure of the book, once we got so distracted with, like, cheating on essays, disguises to get into libraries, unknown assailants, social ladders to navigate. Like, there was a pretty big gap between Harry not being able to do magic and that confrontation with Snape. And it's like, so like the tension of that was kind of diminished before we went into the scene, and also like Harry was acting as if it wasn't a big deal. You'd think for a character who desperately needs to not draw attention.
Like screw getting kicked out for being caught. Like, you're going to get kicked out because you can't do magic.
Yeah, or at least people are going to pay too much attention to you, and that's, more eyeballs on you is just a problem. Though right under that, I do have a note that says, "Is it my imagination, or is the writing getting pretty good in this scene with Snape where they're discussing her magic?" Like, that was kind of like the first like real bump in writing quality, I think, like really, really harshly. I just had a literally copy paste here of like, Rigel smiled gratefully at her head of house. She rather thought he was only gruff and dismissive because he didn't know what else to be sometimes. And then I just wrote, yeah, he's a real piece of shit. And then also I love that scene because it's like they have that whole thing where she freaks out and like blows up half his office and makes a million needles, and they finally come back down from that. They have an academic discussion. I think this is what's wrong with you, Rigel. Let's fix the problem. We're going to work together on this. And then she's about to leave, and he goes, I don't need your filthy father's money.
Yeah.
And it's like for a half a second, he just like it goes from a scene that maybe got to an 8 before, and he takes it to an 11 instantly. So fast. And it's like, you got to like, it's important for Snape because it's like we're kind of making him obviously a nicer person than he was in canon, at least, because at least he has one character he's being nice to.
Right.
But we need to show that there's still that just absolute bitter, just fury, just right underneath the surface.
And that's kind of what I was talking about, where he handles Rigel exploding because he's like, this is a student who's going through some shit, but then mentions family and he is not a fan of the Fast and Furious franchise. He does not care for family. He does not care for family. Mi familia. Okay, now kind of getting on to the whole Lee Jordan thing. Being spotted by Filch's cat is a pretty flimsy reason for not giving Harry the name of the suspect, but I suppose it was at least a reason, and I can be pleased with that, because they're like right next to saying, don't get caught alone with Lee, and then it didn't matter, because ultimately Lee just attacks her 2 minutes later anyway, and she would have had time to defend herself, but whatever. That is one where, like, it's definitely the feeling of, like, she didn't have a plan for the whole first book, where it's like, really, the first semester and the second semester have 2 different plots. They really do.
Because the first semester is, like, her just kind of navigating being at Hogwarts, and someone's attacking her, and we get like a couple of clues. The only real clue rereading it that's good is that there's when she goes to the common room to work with Percy Weasley for a little bit, and Lee Jordan comes over. Basically, he runs off like, I'm going to go talk to McGonagall and see if I can do a career change. Blah, 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 right? Then Lee comes over and talks to her for a minute. Then he leaves, and then Fred and George come in and talk to her for a bit, and then she leaves with Fred and George. And just in the prose, it's passingly mentioned, as they were leaving, as they were heading back to the Slytherin common room, they bumped into Lee, who was coming back. But he excused himself and said he had something to do in the common room. That was probably Lee setting up to jump her again.
Yeah.
That's really the only major hint, though. There's not a ton of other clues to pick up along the way, which is a little bit disappointing. Yeah. Like I said, I don't think that Violet's a super good whodunit writer, which is good because by the time they get to 4th book, there's no whodunit element anymore. It's just raw suspense, baby.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that.
Talking about, kind of weird flourishy bits as well that I'm sure you noticed. A good example of flourishy, unnecessary writing when Lee attacks her. There's a whole paragraph blown on Rigel observing the bag and guessing what type of creature is inside of it.
Yeah.
When 2 seconds later we get a description of what it is when he pulls it out, right? It's like we don't really need to see how smart Harry is by having her guess what type of thing is in the bag based on its bone structure or whatever. It's like that's kind of a flourishy, unnecessary detail. We could have skipped that paragraph and just had him,
Just what's the bag?
Yeah, the bag is writhing around as if something is alive inside of it, and then she, showing that Harry's smart, that she's like making this deduction or whatever, but it's like, that's not an important deduction. That's not an important Harry is smart moment.
And it's for pacing.
We're in a scene where she's getting attacked.
Right. We're not concerned about Harry being smart right now. We're concerned about, like, what's gonna happen.
Yeah. Okay, I also had this. I didn't remember what made her freak out when Lee was finally totally freak out. I'm glad that it was him threatening Harry, or in this case Archie, not just the losing sensation in her hands bit. It's richer characterization that way, and it's important since we don't see a ton of her relationship with Archie in the first book. in the first book, I mean, there's really only one chapter before they're on the Hogwarts Express, and then the Christmas vacation is after this.
Right.
And really, she and Archie have a really, really super tight relationship. And so it's valuable that, like, she freaks out and is despairing and screaming for help when he says, I'm going to F up your hands permanently to just to mess with you. But, like, that she doesn't do her, like, accidentally activate my superpowers crap until he's threatening to go after her.
It's not just me anymore. It's my
her bro, her adopted bro, not adopted, whatever. Her cousin who she thinks
brother.
of as who's barely even a cousin, but who cares?
Oh, they're not cousin at all.
There's several family trees removed, the Potters and the Blacks.
Oh, okay, I didn't think they were
they're not actually cousins.
Yeah.
They're like fourth or fifth cousins or something like that, maybe further away than that. I don't remember the specific. They mentioned the family tree at some point, but they're only connected in that pure-blooded families go way back, right? They're very, 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 very remotely familially connected.
Okay.
But it's just that, like, it's in the same way, like, you have very close family friends and you call that, like, uncle whatever. Anyway, I do like, again, talking about, like, kind of swerves into violence, right? Like, with her getting her wrist broken early on, and also, like, when she freaks out, it's like no time is wasted. Lee gets wrecked immediately. He gets thrown into the wall, his wrist gets broken.
Yeah.
He gets really messed up. When Alden Rossier shows up, says, "You didn't kill him, did you?" Cox has cocked his head to the side, cocks his head to consider her like she was the finest entertainment, because we'll have to cover it up before a teacher stumbles along. He's yeah, all right. That feels more like the actual character I have written down here, because his writing earlier on in the first book feels different from how he is later on a little bit, but that feels very how Alden is in the later books, joking around like that. You didn't kill him, did you? Because we'll have to cover it up if we have to.
That sounds like more trouble. To kind of piggyback off that right there, though, the, like, magic, like, immediately just, here is what you want, I am giving it to you, dude, is
incapacitated.
Yeah, done. I almost said incognito, and then it's not really what I wanted. But I thought it was so neat that she's like, okay, now I have to give my magic something to do, so I'm going to tell it to untie the ropes, and then I'm going to tell it to unweave the ropes.
Well, no, he didn't tell her to do that.
Yeah, no, she told it to unweave the rope to give it something to do. But then the magic goes further, and it's like, not only am I going to unweave the rope, I'm going to undo every strand, and then I'm going to turn every strand back into him. So, like, she does tell it to do...
I wonder what the rules are about blazing up at Hogwarts. You said hemp, and anyway.
Yeah. I don't know. I wonder if it's considered, like, a magical property.
Magic mushrooms there's a whole class on it at Hogwarts.
I don't know. Maybe, like, CBD is part of, not...
Divination?
Yeah, that's the one I wanted.
Maybe. Who knows? They didn't really take divination classes once they got to the higher level. Maybe when you get to your newt level, it's just magic mushrooms all day, baby.
It's just drugs. Just doing drugs on school property. I feel like Dumbledore would fully support that.
So there's not a ton of...
As long as you do it on campus, kids, it's okay.
Yeah, with supervision on campus, you're fine. So this is kind of jumping ahead. Dumbledore's barely in this book, which is another thing where, like, if you haven't read the source material, it's like, oh, Dumbledore runs the political party and he's the headmaster and he's a really important character, and people talk about, like, undermining his credibility, and it's like, if you haven't read the source material, who's Dumbledore? He's really not in the first book very much. Yeah. I believe the third book, I mentioned Time Turner stuff. I'll tell you this because it's like, I don't consider this a spoiler, really. Basically, Harry signs up for a bunch more classes than she can get, very similarly to Hermione, thinking she won't get them all. But then she's approached at the beginning of the third year, hey, you can still take some of these. We put in a thing, we can get you a Time Turner. The same thing that what Hermione does in book 3, but it's not a twist because we're seeing it from Harry's perspective. When she starts taking more classes in book 3, one of the classes she takes is Dumbledore takes on every year, like, 3 students to teach alchemy. Oh. And she's the only third year doing alchemy. Boy, does that alchemy stuff become very nerdy and very important.
Of course.
Anyway, after she beats up Lee on an accident, partially, because this is the whole thing where, like, her magic is uncontrollable and it kind of does what she asks. Like, she asks it to do things instead of forcing it to do things. The other characters are like, Harry, magic isn't sentient, Rigel. You tell it to do things and it doesn't. And she's like, I don't feel that way at all. It seems like it's got a mind of its own. I have to ask it politely to do stuff. After she does that whole thing, there's the whole bit where she recaps the, kind of the plot of the book up to that point to all the characters in real time. Yeah. And it's like, I will say, I wrote down, that wasn't nearly as bad as at this time since I was expecting it. That said, after the recap, there's a real, like, look, the problem is over energy to the whole thing. Because, like, it just cuts, and it's like, okay, the whole first semester has been somebody's attacking Rigel. And then it's like, after she explains, cut, Lee's expelled, and he transferred to another school, and it's one paragraph, and the problem is over. And it just feels a little unceremonious.
Time for a new problem.
It feels a little unceremonious. I won't say anticlimactic because the confrontation with him is fine.
Yeah.
But it's a little unceremonious. I guess I should also say, in case people are listening to this, and they haven't read the book, so Lee Jordan basically is hazing Rigel Black as revenge because his family went bankrupt because of competition with the Marauders joke line. This is one of the only times in the series where Violet takes an existing character and really, really AUs them in this way. Like, Draco is kind of a nicer character, but he's still Draco.
Right.
Harry's kind of a completely different concoction now. And Pansy is functionally an OC because Pansy wasn't a character. She was like she was like
twice.
She occasionally functioned as arm candy for Draco, and that was about it, right? This new version of Pansy, like, I think she deliberately, like, on purpose went, canon Pansy is described as being brunette. My Pansy is blonde with a different haircut, looks nothing like the actress from the movies or described in the books because she's a different person.
Well, so in the books it doesn't say, just in the movies she's
okay. All right,
I distinctly remember that author's note.
Okay, got it.
Not that I remember that from the books. I remember the author's note.
Gotcha. Okay. You're right. I remember she wrote something about one of the characters' hairstyles, but I didn't remember if it was Pansy or something. I believe you. But anyway, the Lee is one of the only characters who gets, like, completely twisted around from, like, protagonist to antagonist type stuff. I don't
know that you'd really consider Lee a full-blown, like, protagonist.
Well, nice character background at Hogwarts, who in this becomes, like, an attempted maimer, at least, maybe not a murderer. The acid thing probably would have, I don't know, maybe in Magic that wouldn't have killed her. Yeah. But at least his final plan was definitely maiming, not assassination. But I'm racking my brains for any characters who are, like, complete archetype swaps, and I can't really think of anybody. I think for the most part, I'm not even thinking into the later books. Yeah. Like, there are a few characters whose roles are very, very different because, for example, they're not murderers anymore. Yeah. Like, Tom Riddle is also essentially a new character, with, like, kind of similar backstory elements, but he's not, like, a good guy. Yeah. Lee Jordan, I believe, is the only, like, complete character personality flip that exists in these. I could be mistaken, but I say that because if someone is listening to this and they're not reading the book, they're just listening, thinking, I don't care about spoilers, maybe Jacob and Aidan can convince me to go read this. I feel like since we're talking about, just out of the blue, Lee Jordan trying to kill Harry Potter, we should say, because there's, like, what's it called? Crack AUs and crack fan fictions where it's just, like, crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Just all over the place. This is old terminology, Aidan. You made a little face at me.
It took a second for it to register, and I was like, no, I have heard that before.
Okay, because I was like, I'm not sure, because you're a little bit younger than me, and I was like, I'm not sure if that survived to the Tumblr era. That might have been before your time of fandom scene. But yeah, I think it's still around a little bit. There's nothing super crazy or out there with, there's very few instances of Violet taking a character who already existed in canon and saying, I'm going to do something completely different with you now. In fact, what I was going to say with Dumbledore a second ago is that you were talking about how this Snape, you can 100% hear as Alan Rickman, but it's not like, because obviously Alan Rickman performs slightly differently from how Snape is written. I feel the writing of Snape is very loyal to the book Snape, but also you can definitely hear it as Rickman, because Rickman's pretty close to book Snape. One thing I like about her Dumbledore, Violet's Dumbledore is like one-to-one book Dumbledore, especially later on. You only hear a bit of him in the first book, obviously, but once you get to more screen time for him, I like both of the actors who play him in the movies, the one from the first two who passed away, and then the guy who plays him in the later ones, but like, they're both, neither of them is quite book Dumbledore, they're both doing different things. I really enjoy both of those performances. I honestly, some people don't like him. People freak out about the whole, Harry, did you put your cup in the goblet of fire? Like, he says it very urgently instead of calmly. People freak out about that like being a betrayal or whatever. I don't know. I really like Dumbledore book 3, movie 3 forward. I really like that actor. I think he did a great job. I like how he handled the character. But he's not the book one. Right, yeah. And I don't have a problem with, like, different. Because honestly, I prefer seeing more different interpretations. I prefer to see more versions of the thing that I like. Slightly different permutations of it. To me, that's fun. That said, Violet's Dumbledore in my head sounds exactly the same as original JK book Dumbledore.
Okay.
Like she has it like down pat.
Okay.
You won't see much of that until later, obviously, but she's like she has absolutely nailed book Dumbledore voice.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah. But anyway, just like I feel like that, like once the Lee Jordan thing is dealt with, she's like out of school in like a matter of paragraphs almost. Then it cuts to the basically the only two Archie scenes we were talking about earlier, where they get the I like those scenes, but it's a bit weird to go so quickly and harshly from Harry almost getting maimed and doing this violent attack to Archie and Hermione's wacky potion heist. Even though we get very little of both of them. I like that Archie, on one hand, sometimes he doesn't sound like an 11-year-old, but on the other hand, he is the son of Sirius Black.
Yeah.
And as Sirius Black, especially in this, she's really writing him as like he used to be just like a completely insatiable flirt.
Yeah.
There's notorious. And I really love. There's very good characterization for both him and Hermione of when she says, "I don't know about this, Harry. If we get caught." She automatically just defaults to the pronoun we, and then he cuts her off and goes, "Lovely, I knew I could count on you," and then just move on. Like that's great. That's really good for both of them.
Yeah.
And especially Hermione, who we will see very little of. It's really important. Violet's quite good at this. When we do cut to Violet and Archie in America, it is only stuff that we absolutely need to see, and she crams every molecule of characterization into those scenes that she can.
Yeah.
Like, and I mean, not that Hermione's that different from canon Hermione. She's pretty close to canon Hermione, but since Archie is a completely new concoction, we really need these scenes to be able to understand the two of them and their relationship.
Yeah.
And she does quite a good job, I think, with all of those.
I agree. I concur.
I do like you were talking about, other than just the troll in the dungeon bit, their plan to steal the polyjuice is like, let's steal it, and then once we have enough, we dump the other batches onto the floor, so it looks like it was a prank, not a heist.
Right.
Which is cute. I think maybe a later version of Hermione would have brewed a potion that was like the same color and consistency.
Kind of how Rigel does at the beginning. I replaced it with a neutral concoction that smells and tastes bad, so hopefully they'll think it's just a bad batch.
But then again, they were going into a classroom where there were bad batches made, so probably some of the bad ones were not the right color in the first place, and if she tried to pre-brew fake ones, then they would have been noticed.
Yeah.
So... Well, no, I guess she wouldn't want to be stealing the good ones. But yeah, regardless, the plan works.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, since there was no troll in the dungeon, they would have been suspicious of what the hell was going on. So instead of making a clean heist where nothing is missing, and it's like, everybody check these potions.
Yeah.
It was probably better to spill them all. And then they're impossible to check. And it's too late.
But we waited until they were graded, though.
Yeah, we waited until they were graded. We're not messing up anybody's grades, insists Hermione.
Yeah.
Which is, again, very like, she's not in it much, but the author's really got like a grip on who these people are. Yeah, though also I had a note, but how did Archie figure out the exact date and nature of the polyjuice grading without arousing suspicion? Because his initial conversation with the upperclassmen where he finds out that they're doing polyjuice makes sense. Like, he's very clever about how he navigates that conversation, asks innocuous questions, but then between cuts, he knows the whole thing, and it's like, how'd you figure that out without somebody going, why are you asking about that? But who cares? Not important.
Archie's just such a nice guy.
He's a nice guy.
He's just such a nice guy.
He's just one of us guys.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just checking my notes here. Yeah, so this is another, talking about kind of the first book not having as clear of a structure. There is literally an author's note where Violet more or less says, I think at the end of a chapter, where it's like she implemented the Lee stuff, so there would be something going on before the her words, not mine, quotation marks, real stuff picked up in the spring semester, which is just a little bit sloppy. Yeah. But I mean, from notes she's had in the later books, it sounds like she kind of feels very similarly about the first book, which is why I'm trying not to harp on it too much.
Yeah.
Because it's like, she wrote it as a hobby. She wrote it for fun, and then later it became this like serious, I'm dedicating myself to this thing, where she's like, I mean, really, it's honestly, I gotta say, I'm continually floored by her dedication to this story. Like, she's been doing this for 10 years now, and like there were bits between 2016 and 2021 where like she only put out like 2 chapters a year, but like she was doing it. She was still working on it. She just had, real life stuff to take care of. But like she's still going. And book 5 is only 1 chapter deep as of time of this recording. And that first chapter is is pretty good. It's pretty beefy, and she's gonna be going for a while. Hopefully, she said. As I guess I talked about this, I believe, in the Uncharted playthrough, but I don't think I mentioned it in this so far. Mm-hmm. She has stated she thinks book 5 will be the last.
Okay.
But she's not sure. It may go to 6. I assume that by now, if she has all of book 5 planned out, she knows. Mm-hmm. But she hasn't shared those plans with us. Okay. She just said, like, in the author's notes, like, 2 or 3 chapters before book 4 was done. I think it'll be 5, may go to 6. I'm sure by now she knows, but she hasn't told any of us, which is good, because that means as we're getting closer to the end of book 5, probably the suspense will be getting high about whether or not it's going to end or not. Who knows? Yeah. Anyway.
We haven't really talked much about, like, the sleeping sickness.
Well, we just got to the Christmas vacation, so I guess we're about to start that. Okay. I know we're just talking forever. This is part of why we're gonna have to break up the later books into multiple episodes, because these are beefy damn books, dude. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
This is don't read into this too literally, but it's again just like me rereading this and really appreciating some characterization stuff. And this may be, I don't mind telling you this because it's not like a spoiler really, but just something I really appreciated having read all the later books. There's a bit where they're at home where I'm like, I don't feel like Violet completely, totally, firmly has Harriet until a little bit later. Later on, she has this character just nailed, and she knows exactly who she is. But there's a lot of really good stuff in the first book where, like, she's like, oh, she knows where she's going with this character. And there's a bit where Archie gets mad at her because, quote, even if you were dying, you wouldn't ask for help. That is a fairly clear setup for where the character is going to go later. This, I mean, you see that, obviously we've seen this already with the whole wrist thing. She only asked for help because, like, really, I think she was like, what do I do about this? And only because, like, Ron and Neville noticed it. Because she even got the Weasley twins to do what they did, right? She's very, like, even to her own detriment sometimes, determined. Like, we talked about the whole, the library thing. Yeah. Why didn't she just go to a professor and say, listen, can you please do something about this? She took the path of, I guess we from the outside perceive it as most resistance, but I think she literally perceived it as the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
To go and find costumes.
Yeah.
To sneak in and do all the work in the library because she can't check out books. To her, that's the easiest option. She's got her logic's a bit turned around, but again, she has also decided to dress up as a boy for 7 years to attend a school to learn how to do potions. So,
you know, dressing up as a different student in a library does not seem like that big of a deal in comparison.
No. Talking about, you know, there's bits of this book that feel a little bit, looks like I talked about the hazing bit, feeling like a bit weird until you get to, they heal the wrist, so that you can't really take that out. It's like, Harry thinks that she'd like to be able to control what she thinks, since she can't trust her magic. This puts her onto the occlumency stuff, which ultimately isn't how it works, but it's what gets her to read enough about it to be set up to solve the ending of the plot, right? She wouldn't have been set off on that if her magic hadn't almost killed Lee Jordan before. So it's like, even though she said, oh, that was something I wrote to give Harry something to do until the real stuff in the back half, that was actually really, really crucial because she would not have gotten the abilities that she needs to be able to participate in the back half of the book if she hadn't had that experience and gone, I need to not do that again. And this more just like me, like, again, I'm pretty much sure that all of my notes from here on out are going to be just me being complimentary. So, for example, oh, cool, Harry messes up and hugs her mom, even though Archie already did that. It's nice to see that she isn't always perfect. And then she almost screws up again when asked, how's Hogwarts? And Archie has to kick her under the table.
Be like, hey, don't. You're not going to Hogwarts.
Yeah. Archie says, I don't want you to get mixed up in blood politics. Harry replies, I'm not. Keck, I say. Wamow. Rafflemow. Anyway, that's just something fun for me.
Yeah.
For later. Anyway.
I mean, I can assume we're going to get mixed
it's
up in them.
Yeah, it's not like it's hard to guess that that's going there, but it's just really funny to hear Harry say, I'm not.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I would never.
I would never cheat. I really like that Violet just says in an author's note, I'm saying the three brothers had parcel tongue, so Harry has it, get over it. Yeah. Just like, boom, gone.
See, that's the kind of stuff where it's like, it doesn't bother me. Like, it doesn't have to be explained in, like, super deep detail. You don't have to give me the whole family tree of the Pureblood brothers had it. And they had kids and...
But you do want something because it's like she only had it because she was a Horcrux. He only had it because he was a Horcrux in old canon. So why is Harry a Parseltongue in this if the Horcrux thing didn't happen?
So I totally get why we got it, but I also think that I'm glad we didn't have to spend a whole bunch of time in a library
in the book figuring it out.
Well,
right.
That's we didn't have to spend time in a library going through family trees and going, oh, well, I'm descended from so and so, and that's why.
The author just says. Deal with it. I doubt the family tree goes back to the three brothers because the people aren't sure if they're real or not anyway in canon, right? Getting ahead of myself. Rigel is going to be outed as a Parseltongue in book 2. All right. Now she's in Slytherin, so the Slytherin's gonna be like, hey, yeah. But also. Archie isn't.
Right.
And eventually they're going to have to switch. They talk about, we better not let anybody know about this because it'd be very difficult in the future if people know that you're a Parseltongue and I'm not. So this is another thing that's added to this deal is getting worse all the time pretty early on in the whole big scheme of the books of like, this is something that I don't know how we're going to navigate later on. But that's like, again, me like talking about how one thing I really, really appreciate about Violet's writing style is that she's not scared to give the characters problems, to just put them in a lot of damn trouble. And I really feel like there's a couple of other plot reasons that I don't want to talk about because they're later on in the books. But it's partially there because Basilisk stuff is involved later on, and also because Violet relishes in any opportunity she can to create problems for Harry and Archie, especially Harry.
I kind of forgot about the whole Parseltongue thing for a little bit when we first.
Because I mentioned it to you ahead of time that she was
maybe, yeah, I don't know. But, like, reading the first scene where Sirius has gotten all these little snakes because his little boy's a Slytherin and so we're going to have all the snakes. And it says, like, oh, one who smells like dogs, take me inside. And she says something like, man, if Sirius is charming snakes to talk, he must really be lonely. And I was like, that's so something Sirius would do. Like, it didn't even occur to me that it was Parseltongue.
It's very well done. No, there's a lot of really cute and clever writing in this first book. That's again, I don't want to sound like I'm complaining about it too much because it's still really, this book's really fun. Yeah. Like you were saying, I'd get this hardback. This is good stuff. Yeah. There's a ton of really cute and clever stuff throughout all of it, even the front half that I think is kind of sloppy. There's great stuff in this. Couple of notes here that I can't read because they're me reflecting on things that happen in like book 5. There's a bit where Rigel reflects on, quote, not feeling much pride because she hadn't done anything she's particularly proud of. It's like she stays modest as the books go on, but I honestly think part of her character growth later is allowing herself to be pleased with herself when she does certain things. Just something kind of observed a little bit. Just that Harry has some issues with her confidence in herself. Like she's confident in her ability to brew potions, and she's fairly confident in her own like other aspects of herself, but she's got a lot of like issues of who she is, and obviously identity is going to be a big aspect of this character going forward. But her confidence in her own abilities and her desire to stay modest while she's doing impossible superhuman things, which we'll begin to explore shortly as we start talking about the second semester here, where the book kind of picks up and becomes like primo stuff, and not just like this is pretty good fan fiction. Gets to like this is like also unfilmable, by the way. Could never be adapted to film or television.
No.
Anyway, got a lot of notes here. I'll cut out this bit where I'm just rambling to myself, or maybe I won't because maybe it'll be funnier to leave it in. I don't know. Some stuff about future development for characters that I can't read. Oh yeah, you're concerned about 11-year-olds. She mentions in a note, no romance until at least book 3. Yeah. Which is appropriate. I'm not even sure if there's romance in book 3 now that I think of it. I'm trying to like rack my brains. I mean, there's between some of the other characters. Speaking of other characters who possibly have romance things going on, Alisana Slaywin, however you say her name. Prefect? This is the Slytherin prefect, yes, who we'll talk a little bit more about later. But she's clearly got something weird going on with Rockwood and their little animal trading contest.
So I think I noticed, I'm not 100% sure because I didn't go back and check, but after finishing and going back, I think we get a description of her as the prefect who like shows them around at the very beginning.
She is there at the beginning.
But she's
of the
not
story.
name dropped at the beginning. She's just like the long-haired prefect with heavy makeup.
Yeah. No, I think that Violet knew even early on, before she planned a lot of stuff out, that she needed to populate the Slytherin house, and so she probably concocted that character pretty quickly. I don't know if she knew quite what she would use that character for yet. But yeah, she was there right at the beginning. And the some more personal notes here for me. Like, so I was reminding myself, like, Millicent joins the crew in semester 2 after pranking the 2 mean girls. Because I was like, I know that she's in the group later. When does she join? So I had to reread to kind of get to that.
I liked that a lot.
Oh, them screwing with the 2 mean girls and the hair loss potions. Yeah, that's pretty cruel. Well, they deserved it, though.
They were.
They deserved it. But anyway, so we're getting into the second semester here, which means we can finally talk about the plot of the first book, which is Harry starts getting involved with brewing potions for Snape when the sleeping sickness starts hitting the school, where kids are just dropping like flies and going into magical comas, right? And it's like, on one hand, you may go, why is this first year being trusted to do this? But it's like, once it's established, because really he puts her on something simple because she's there and volunteers. Yeah. And then when it's established just how strong and deep her magical reserves are, then it makes sense for him to ask her to do that type of stuff. So I think it's justified, even though she's 11, that he's trusting her with this stuff. So I think it works for the most part.
I think I basically was just gonna say, I don't think you could have done it any other way. You certainly couldn't have her jump straight into the other stuff. Doing the sweat inducers, which are relatively simple and don't need much, and she was like brewing 3 of them at a time or whatever, and like I think that was a really interesting way as well to like show how deep, like, to be like, hey, your magical reserves are stupid deep. Yeah, it's a
good way to demonstrate, because she doesn't realize that she's doing anything impressive.
Right.
She's just taking care of it, which is also why I really, again, like with the way that Snape is written, like, it would have been very easy for him to go, like, for the writer to go, wow, I can't believe how good you are at potions, Mary Sue, Harry Potter, right? Like, oh, you're so cool. And instead, he stays up all night checking everyone, because he's certain that this has been screwed up somehow, and then grills her really harshly, saying, you paid someone to do this, you bought some or whatever. And she's like, don't insult me. Stop. And she only blows up after he's been cross-examining her for like several minutes. And it's, I don't know, it's really good for both of them. It's really like that Snape really has to get used to the idea that this kid is not screwing with him. Because that's his default assumption of his, I guess, existence, right?
And only exaggerated by the fact that not only is this a kid of which he usually has no respect for, it's that kid. It's those people's kid. Yeah. Who obviously is only sent here to make his existence pain. Yeah. You know, so it was very...
That's the expectation, at least, that he has, when Rigel heals Draco, because he gets a little bruise when they're out playing Quidditch, and he's wearing the magical scarf, like the handkerchief that turns into a scarf that she got him for Christmas. He says, just wait till I tell my father about this. He'll be so impressed. And it's like, I find that characterization... Like, I find that decision-making with the character on Violet's part really interesting, because, like, he's different, but a lot of his...
still wait till my father hears
a lot of his issues are still channeled through similar stuff to the source material, because his friends are viewed, maybe not first and foremost, but at least he does process them mentally as social assets, which makes sense with his, kind of at least slightly altered background. I don't know, I think that kind of stuff is really fun. What have I got here? Oh, that's me talking about something that happens in book 4. Skip that. Some other stuff about book 5. There's stuff in here that's totally it's setting up for stuff way later.
Oh my god.
I mean, just to be very clear, I think that a lot of it she planned as she went along, but I think she had very firm ideas of like large. I think she probably started when she started writing. She had like a 2-sentence summary of each book probably in her head. You know what I mean? Like the bare minimum basics.
Right.
And she had a grip on like what each of the like core characters were gonna learn. Like what's Harry gonna learn? How's Snape gonna develop? What's Archie gonna do? Like other things like this. I think she like knew those things pretty well. Even if she had a lot of details left to be filled in. So there's bits and pieces even in the first book where it's like, I mean, maybe I'm giving her too much credit. I don't know. Maybe it's just that she had like, I believe this about the character, and then just so it feels like foreshadowing to me who's read the later books. I don't know. But anyway.
Either way, it is well executed.
She was only starting to realize how dangerous she and Archie's deception really was. The political climate was worse than she imagined. She'd been harboring delusional half-thoughts that she could somehow prove something about half-bloods if she made it through her training and became a potions mistress. Once it was done, no one could take that away from her, she thought, but now she realized no one would ever be able to know. It was simply too inflammatory a ruse. No kidding, kid.
Yeah.
It also, like... It almost feels like the series doesn't really start until she gets that letter that's like, this is the law that's in the works, right?
Yeah.
In some ways, it feels like that's where the book starts. Of like, this is the situation now. Of like, no more loose ends. No one can ever see the map.
Yeah.
I have to go make a vow with Flint to make sure that he can't rat me out. Like, it feels a little bit like that's where the book starts. Of like, I mean, you need all that because like the front half is important.
Yeah.
You're establishing characters and exposition and setting, but it really does feel like the plot only starts to move really intensely in that back half. Especially for me, having read the whole thing and kind of going back to it. What else have I got here? Oh yeah, okay. So there's a bit here where she's kind of catastrophizing a little bit in worst case scenario, as she has a tendency to do. Yes. She's got some issues. She's got some real like self-confidence issues and other things. Maybe Archie was supposed to be here to help somehow with this magical sickness in a way that she couldn't. This sort of disease was exactly Archie's area of interest after all. So my note is, Harry's a pretty fun, deep character, actually. Consistently worst case scenario, constantly worst case scenarioing, major case of imposter syndrome.
Absolutely.
Constantly selling herself short and misunderstanding the value of simple things like comforting her friends. Yeah. Because like that's a bit where like she's comforting, like right before that she's comforting Pansy. And then she starts going, I feel so useless, there's nothing else that I can do. And it's like, you know, making your friend feel good about the unknown disease that's afflicting everybody is like a very valuable, important thing to do, but she like can't process how important
I'm not curing the disease, so what I'm doing doesn't matter.
She can't process how important that probably was to Pansy that she did that for her, right? And it's like, you know, it comes from a place of concern and compassion, but she lacks confidence in her own ability to express those things, right? She totally has Asperger's. Anyway, so when we switch to Snape's POV, he does say that he's uneasy with the new Muggle-born legislation that's in the offing, but it's very brief and vague. Right. You know, it doesn't. There's no real mention. It's the only real mention we get of like his allegiance to whoever, and it's like, it really still doesn't tell us anything. Like, what is the deal? Is he a spy for Dumbledore and he's all on Dumbledore's side, or is he like kind of a moderate, but the purebloods like him? Like, what's the? We really don't. I really like that by just mystery. I really like that just by Lily Evans is alive. Snape is got this whole. I mean, we still have a good understanding of it. There's just this whole because like there's this whole aspect of him where like what's the deal now? I don't know. But yeah, I guess I'm sort of skimming through my notes. But Aidan, because I want to hear your thoughts a bit on breaking into. We'll skip ahead because whatever. We've been talking for a long time. Let's skip ahead to like when the action really picks up. Of like Snape has to leave because we run out of this ingredient. Ginseng. We have to replace it with this thing that Draco's allergic to.
The acai berries. Those have been popular for a while as like a health food, and I have no idea how you're supposed to say it.
I don't know. And Harry has to save Draco before whatever. If you're this far in, you're either gonna read the book, you're not gonna read the book, or you've read it. We don't need to waste our time explaining the plot. You can go figure it out or not. But the whole sequence of events with Harry saving Draco or figuring out how to save all of them in general, I really want to hear what you think about all that. Because, by the way, folks, we haven't talked before this recording, really, other than a couple of texts. Go ahead.
So especially since the end, I basically was just like, I finished it. I'm excited. So the whole of it was just mind-blowing. She's been practicing this occlumency, whatever.
Occlumency, I don't know, dude.
So she's got her nice mind palace built.
Or really, it's a really basic one, but it's just developed enough that it helps her with this situation.
Yeah, but she's spent enough time there that instead of like all of the other first years, she notices and knows what is about to happen, and she locks herself away in her mind palace with all of her secrets, which I think, just as an 11-year-old, that was already pretty freaking cool. Of thinking, like, I've got this set up so that this room, at the very least, is safe. Yeah. And I thought the password was funny, too, that she puts on there, like, this is the room with my secrets. So in order to get into it,
you have to already know what's going on.
So that was pretty cool. And being able, in her own head, to figure out that she needed to go through her own magical core and then to be in the weird meditative but aware of what's happening and be able to be like, put me next to Draco. Just the whole dang thing was super cool.
So there's a there's a bit in that where she goes, wait, connections, that's it, right? And then she deduces, okay, since Snape showed me how to do this thing previously, maybe I can use it in this new creative way and get over there. And she's, I guess, doesn't know enough about the system to know that what she does is supposed to be impossible.
Right.
But she's a freak of nature and apparently can do this stuff. That bit was... So I've talked a lot about, again, as I'm talking about Kingdom Hearts and stuff, about lore and handling of lore and why... I did a video that you can't watch yet because you're not caught up on Kingdom Hearts, but a 3-hour-long video about a year ago now, called currently untitled. It's called an untitled video on the storytelling in modern Kingdom Hearts.
Okay.
And I did a bit where I talked about how I don't mind complicated or insane, crazy lore or things that breach real world logic and fiction. It can be lots of fun. But you have to decide whether you're we are crazy clown car rules, and we're going to give just enough lore to give you a basic understanding of what's happening. Or if you're going to have very long, drawn-out exposition explaining the rules of your world. And if you're going to do the second one, then you need to, if you're going to bother to have the rules, then you need to follow them to some extent. Now, of course, in this book, it's a good example of, everyone says, Harry, the things you're doing are impossible, but she's doing them. We are told lore, and then Harry does things contradictory to them, but it's treated as a contradiction. It's acknowledged that it's a contradiction. A big issue in Kingdom Hearts is the characters will spend unorthodox amount of time explaining lore and rules to you, and then when the time comes for the finale, those rules will be completely thrown out for some really uncreative Sora summons a beam of light that fixes the problem.
Right.
So it's you could have just said, oh no, the bad guys are bad and we have to stop them, and then when he summoned the beam of light and stopped the bad guys, I don't care.
Yeah.
When you spend across a 40-hour game probably 2 hours of my time on cutscenes explaining the complexities of the problem, and Sora solves it because he believed in himself really hard, it's not fun, right? So for example, an example that I gave in that untitled storytelling in Kingdom Hearts video was I talked about, imagine if in Spider-Verse, in Into the Spider-Verse, they had, in that actual movie, the way that they fix the problem is they have a flash drive they have to put into the machine, and that's it. They put a flash drive into I almost said Eggman, into Wilson Fisk's Mammon machine, and it shuts the portal crap dimension stuff down, right? It's not that complicated because the movie's focused on the characters and the action of how they're going to get there. So the solution for shutting the machine down is as simple as we have a thing we use and it shuts it down, right? So, and I was saying that Kingdom Hearts' style of writing is you would have characters for 2 hours of the movie constantly wringing their hands over, oh no, how do we stop it? The machine is so complicated. How do we beat it? Because the machine has all these incredible, and they would spend 20 minutes explaining the complex workings of the machine and how it could possibly and how do we possibly beat it? And then during the finale, Miles would go, wait, hold on, then that's it, and he would shoot a web into the machine, and that would stop the machine from working.
Yeah.
And that's I use that as an extreme example of what I think the problems are with more recent Kingdom Hearts writing. There's a lot of other things that have this problem, but this is a really good example because Harry almost says the exact line that I just said of wait, if, then, that's it.
Yeah.
She almost says that verbatim in her own mind, but it's because she's using information that was established in a totally unrelated scenario earlier on when there was important exposition about something that was important to that scene and that part of the plot of figuring out what's wrong with Harry's magic. And then she uses that information in a completely different way later on and in a new experimental way and other information that she's picked up along the way and unrelated skills like occlumency to actually be able to navigate all of this stuff. And it's really wild imagery, imagining Ghost Harriet flying along these weird abstract pathways and then into people's souls basically.
Yeah.
And seeing the different the whole going into asking the Mercury, can I come in, and it forms a staircase for her when she goes into Pansies.
Yeah.
So much, we don't even see a lot of it, but there's just so much weird, wacky imagery in that sequence.
Cute little Neville in his little greenhouse.
I've been hanging out in here. They're already blooming already. They shouldn't be, but who cares? Because it's a dream, so it doesn't matter. Oh my god. Sorry. I just got very distracted. I got a text. I looked down. It's a text from my brother who is listening to Cosmonaut Variety Hour's tabletop podcast.
Okay.
He's been listening to their Star Wars campaign. He's back up and he's listening to their fantasy campaign. And he's texted me. I said, my new favorite quote from Cosmonaut Tabletop is, "Am I about to get Hotel California?" Which I remember is a good line. But I was also thinking Hotel California was on the radio last night, so it was double funny.
It's
anyway,
one of my favorite songs. It's the first song I ever got a perfect score on Guitar Hero.
Oh, good for you. I could never play Guitar Hero. I used to really impress some of my friends back in the day, because even before I owned a video game console, I'd go over to their house and I was decent at some games, and then later on I got pretty good, and I'd go over and we'd hang out and be like, oh, you're pretty, and we'd do multiplayer games and be pretty good, whatever. And I could not do Guitar Hero. I didn't mind that much. I'm not trying to be like ego stroking or whatever, but it was like I tried to learn it and I couldn't. I was so bad.
When I say perfect score, I mean on hard, not on. I did not use maybe a little of the orange, never the blue. Did not ever touch the blue.
That's a code somebody understood, not me though, because I never got that far. I really like. I've already been talking about this a bit, but I just have a note written down about it, so it's more specific and kind of related to setting up Harry's skill set that she needs for the finale, right? I really like how Violet sets up like concepts, rules, and threats, right? Like Snape explains that the sickness spreads from a natural leak of magical signature in energy from a person, including from their mind, right? Because everybody has this leak, and it comes just like they kind of release a magical signature, right? Which goes to, in this case, other people's brains, which is how the sickness is spreading. If minds aren't protected or tightly controlled, this just happens passively. There's always this slight leak of magic, right?
Ambient.
And it means that if two adult wizards have been friends for a very long time, they may detect each other based on proximity subconsciously, right? So this is a neat setup for the sleeping sickness, for how it spreads, for what it is. It's a cool idea for a magical malady, right? Yeah. But really, it's a setup for a perpetual threat of Harry and Archie's scheme being thwarted by mind readers. Oh. Because as the books go on, they realize, wait a second, if people are really attuned to magical signals...
in that way, ours are not the same.
Pretty quickly, Harry realizes when she interacts with a couple of people, she realizes, wait a second, that person is good. Riddle specifically. Oh, okay. Riddle can sense me when I'm like a room away because Riddle knows my magical signature.
That's not good.
That's a big problem.
That's not good.
Remember when I said that this author really, really loves stacking more and more complexities on top of their... And I said, like, so what more complexities could appear than just she's pretending to be a boy and not getting caught? Violet comes up with every single she invents rules so that things can go wrong for Harry. Okay? She invents lore just so Harry can have a bad time. It's fantastic, dude. I love it. But minor spoiler, but I don't care. That gets established fairly quickly.
That's pretty cool, though.
God, I mean, I'm gonna start just for the purposes of getting us through this. I'm gonna start just skimming through my notes. And Aidan, you jump in with anything you want to talk about at any point during any of this. Harry's hyper-competent, super smart characterization only works as well as it does because she does occasionally screw up or completely lose her cool, like she does when Draco passes out, is my specific comment here on like her just like pretty much panic attacking when he succumbs to the sickness. And just not only does she not know what to do, but as soon as she starts like trying to, I have it written. I actually wrote down a quote. I can't do this, she thought, her frustration mounting. I'm just a weak little girl with no upper body strength. If only I were stronger. If only I was a real boy. If Archie was here, he could do it. Yeah. And it's like having those moments where she just like completely loses. For a character who's very put together and internal and not a lot of outward expression because she's very in control of herself, seeing her just like completely lose it in moments like that is very like... not only humanizing, but it's important for understanding who she is. Because like she's keeping all that stuff locked down because really she is like... She has moments where she completely explodes, but she has to be pushed really hard, which is... I don't know. It's fun. It's very rich characterization. And she only gets better at it as the books go on, honestly. What else have I got here? But then she gets out of her own way and she figures out a solution because she has to and only relies on herself.
Again.
I specifically wrote, what a great little invention of a character. Because she just, I don't know, just like, again, she's very well characterized, especially in the back half of the first book. Violet's grip on who she wants Harriet to be is so strong later on. She's amazing. She's such a good little creation. She's such a fun little character. She screws up or doesn't know how to deal with situations. Like, she'll she'll find a way out of it even when she thinks that it's helpless, but getting her to these places, even temporarily, really sells you on the character. You know, it doesn't make her seem like... It doesn't make her hyper competence seem contrived.
Right.
You know, it doesn't feel easy or fan fiction-y, I guess. I didn't write a ton about the actual stuff where she's inside of Draco's head and whatnot, because it's just neat and there's not much to talk about it except that it's just really cool.
Yeah.
Like, it's the later finales of Violet's books are generally higher stakes.
Okay.
Obviously, the stakes here are that Draco could die.
Yeah.
Though we find out in the epilogue that Snape secretly could have saved him. But I guess not. He kept it a secret from Rigel. He was about to go and save Draco when he noticed, oh, Rigel's actually accomplishing something.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, really, I just don't have much to say about all that stuff, except it's just really cool. I like the mental, like, projections of themselves, like how Harry's looks different, obviously, but even Draco's, like, she just puts in little stuff, like he's barefoot. I like the different cores. It's like, it doesn't feel too on point to, like, you know, they don't feel too on point or exaggerated with the personalities. They're just kind of fun. Feels fun to kind of get that, like, I guess that lore aspect a little bit of, like, that they're all elemental at some level on the inside. I don't know. I don't have much to say about that finale except that it's really good.
It is. There's nothing that I wish had been done even slightly differently. I have no ideas that I think could have made it better. It was just, and it was so cool. It was just so freaking cool to see all of the stuff, like, come together like that.
Yeah,
and for Rigel to, like, really have a triumph and save her friends, and them be like, no, you're screwing with us, do it again. And she's like, I'll
do it again. Yeah. What do you want from me?
And it just, it's good stuff.
It's really, no, it's so good. And consider that this book, by the author's own admission, wasn't super carefully planned out. And how much, like, it didn't just come out of nowhere. Like, there were so many building blocks leading to that finale.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I'm telling you that I think the later books are extremely tight. And like, I mean, like, I'm not even gonna be like, you know, oh, the other ones blow that finale out of the water, because I really like the Sleeping Sickness finale. But like, they only get better, and they get better by like orders of magnitude.
Oh my gosh.
I really, really love this series, dude.
Excited.
I know. I really wanted to get, because I knew you were gonna read faster than me. I tried to, when I finished last week, get ahead on Serpentine Subterfuge, so I'd be ahead of you. But I've only like read half of the first chapter, so unfortunately, you're probably gonna outstrip me very quickly again. But that's okay, because I think I'm probably gonna. I probably need to jump ahead a little bit and remind myself where chapters are and say, like, hey, Aidan, at this point, stop reading and we'll record an episode.
Okay.
I don't know if for 2 we may be able to do 1 episode, but honestly, considering how much we had to say about this one, it might be a good idea if we divide the books
in
half. At least in half.
Yeah.
Especially because, okay, so, like, for example, there's a lot of cute, cool stuff throughout the book, but that Sleeping Sickness finale is so cool that you really want to talk about that coming in here, didn't you?
Yeah.
The later
Even
books,
though we've now established neither of us have anything to say other than it's so freaking cool.
We're gonna have a lot. I think you'll have way more to say other than just it's really cool, especially about the finales for book 3 and 4. And like, they are so, even 2 are like so cool that I'm almost afraid that like it will be impossible to talk about the books. Like, if we read books 3 in its entirety and we didn't have a stop in the middle and we sat down to talk about it, Aidan would not be physically capable of waiting to talk about the finale. And it would be, and like for book 4, like, I don't think I would be able to wait to talk about the finale. I think I would have to say, we'll talk about the rest of the book later. Let's jump to the end, which is insane.
Yeah.
But it's just the way these finales are quite good. And it's not in a way of like, you know, oh, the rest of the book is just a build up to the finale and it's not quality stuff. Because the whole mass of these later books, this first book, like I've said already several times, the first semester's kind of choppy. Oh, these other books, the finales are great, but like, it's all good stuff leading up to them. I'm almost upset by how good the finales of 3 and 4 are, because they almost mentally overshadow big chunks of the other books for me, and it's like the rest of the books are so good. I've started rereading 4 before we started doing this reread of me going back to the first one, because I just wanted to go through the adventure of 4 again, because it's so good. Anyway, what else have I got sitting in my notes here as we're getting to the end?
When I did finish the first one, I like stood up and walked to like my roommate's room, and I just kind of stood in the door for a second, and they were like, do you need something? And I was like, I feel alone. I finished this and I don't know what to do with myself, and I'm so proud of these children, and I cannot sit on my bed by myself right now.
It really is telling about the quality of Violet's writing, even in this first book, that we have a story about an 11-year-old kid, a gender-bent Harry Potter 11-year-old girl, having the most magic and doing impossible feats that all the adults are like, that's impossible. And we aren't going, that's a little cringy fanfiction-y. We are going, I'm so proud of her.
Yes! No, so the way you described it at the very beginning, and we've talked a little bit about this, and I don't mind saying it now that we are openly talking about fanfiction, but when you first started describing this, I really thought you were talking about My Immortal. And
I still don't know how you made that leap from what I now know about My Immortal, but that's fine.
Well, you were just talking like the main character, and they go to Hogwarts, and everything's different, and they're a Slytherin, and we're friends with Draco, and I was like, oh shit. Like, and you were like so into it, and I was like, no, it can't be.
There's no way that he's into that.
And once you started talking more, and I knew it wasn't, I was like, I cannot admit that this is what I thought you were talking about.
You did admit it to Jolie and I after the recording.
Right.
But I guess you're okay with admitting it now?
Yeah, I am.
I assume you discovered that like via the video and stuff anyway, or did you? Or I'm about to put the video that you showed like.
Oh, I didn't read it. No,
yeah, that's what I'm saying. So you found it because it was a meme, not because like you earnestly read it as a kid or whatever.
No.
What are you doing, you motherfuckers? It was Dumbledore.
Oh God.
We hopped in his flying Mercedes-Benz. The license plate said 666. I was feeling a little depressed, so I cut myself.
I love that you're quoting it now.
I've only know this first because like you played the audiobook version of it. If we can call it an audiobook. What was the YouTuber?
I think I tried to find the one that Cry read.
Okay, all right. By the time this goes out, it may be a bonus feature on Patreon. Midway through Aidan sharing the audio recording of the first couple of chapters of My Immortal, I turned on the camera on my phone because I realized that we were experiencing a comedy nirvana of sorts. So I don't think I'm going to put that up publicly, but I think that's going to be a little like Patreon reward for people listening to this terrible fan fiction.
Yeah, so when you were talking about it, I was fully prepared for cringe. Mm-hmm. I was fully prepared. And even a little bit, like when I sent you that message of I'm 100% over it, like I have accepted Harriet, I have accepted Draco, like that really... I had to get over it, over the expectation of this is going to get bad eventually, and I need to guard myself and not set my expectations high.
The only time that ever tripped me up after I was like enjoying it was one time, I think I've already mentioned, there's a weird bit towards the end of book 2 with some weird hair stroking.
Yeah.
It's a little bit odd. That like caught me really off guard because book 2 is quite long and there'd been nothing weird.
Yeah.
But no, like it's not only like I'm putting myself on guard for this to eventually get bad. It's like it only gets better. It's wild. I mean, I guess it's not wild for something to be written well. It's wild for me to find something written well in this format.
Right. Yeah.
Oh boy. That's me theorizing about book 5. We'll scroll past that. That's me theorizing that something might be arc words, that a sentence that someone says in book 1 may be turned around on them in book 5, but I'm not going to talk about that. Harry felt decidedly self-conscious as she watched Professor Snape look around with interest at her mindscape. It's usually much nicer, she told him. It's just, these books are cute. It's just easy stuff sometimes, but they're fun. They're cute. I also really like Harry freaking out about not telling Snape that Draco was sick, and then him not only assuring her that she did the right thing, but telling her that she should be proud of what she's accomplished. Then he says, do not worry about developing an overinflated ego, he told her, looking down his nose at her. I can spot one coming years before it swells, and the very moment I sense you to be valuing yourself more than you merit, I will be only too happy to intervene. And then also, we do eventually learn that he lied and that he could come back and save Draco, but he didn't want Rigel to feel guilty because he's starting to like the kid and knows he has talent and needs to help the kid kick that imposter syndrome.
And then the fact that he's like, but why do I even care about this kid?
But it's clear that he understood intuitively, like, telling Rigel,
Yeah.
like, is just gonna hurt. Like, it's
Yeah.
just, it will have no benefit for anyone.
Yeah.
Except me, not even, because I don't want to be mean to this kid, I guess. But why don't I want to be mean to this kid?
Like, I want to be mean to this kid's parents, but not this kid.
The development of Snape and Rigel's relationship is pretty interesting. And it's not like, oh, by the time you get to book 3, Snape is like lovey-dovey and a totally different person or whatever. He's still the same person. It's just, I don't know, it's interesting. Scrolling past some other notes because it's getting late and we've been recording for a long time. So a recurring thing in all of these books is that Harry doesn't want to draw attention to herself, but continually does extraordinary things and everybody hears about it. And that's interesting, but here in the first book where it hasn't been thoroughly explored yet, something else interesting comes up as she feels like this for the first time, right? Unlike canon Harry, she needs to get out of Hogwarts and go home because being there is oppressive and stressful. For Harry, leaving Hogwarts in canon, male Harry, is, I don't want to go home because home sucks. I want to stay at Hogwarts. I like this more. It's really interesting to see that flip where at the end, she's like, I am so stressed and tired of everybody looking at me and paying attention to me and talking about how cool I am. I need to get out. I need to get the hell out of here, which is just a lot of fun. And then I also have written down, the final letter from Sirius is brutal. Of all the stuff going on, Harry does have, of all of the stuff that she's dealing with, Harry does have control over this situation, and she's just messing it up because she sucks. Yeah. Because she's just not good at this. And I love that in Sirius's letter, he reveals that Archie is writing Harry's parents weekly. It's like, what are you doing? That seems like that's a mistake on his part, almost.
Yeah, a little bit. And that's probably him holding back.
Yeah.
He'd be a Draco sending one every night.
Anyway, the
My parents actually get to hear about this because they're not dead.
Hold on one second. Is there anything in here that I need to read about or not? Okay, that's more just notes from me. I'll just skip past that. Oh, there's one bit, I'll mention this because I'll never think of it again, that was just funny to me. There's a bit at the very end where it's observed Pansy was the other best friend, Draco's observation, was the only other best friend he'd ever had, and most of what made her so great was that she was the only one who understood just how weird Rigel really was. And I wrote, like, is this like an Elaine and George situation from Seinfeld where they discover they have nothing in common but Jerry? There's an episode of that where they have to hang out together and they're like, we have nothing in common except for Jerry. That's all I have on notes. I skipped a lot of them anyway because I had a hell of a lot. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about this?
I don't think so.
Because we've been talking for like 3 hours and it's kind of an unceremonious stopping point perhaps. Like that's the ending of the book. She cures the sleeping sickness. She goes home. She tells Sirius Hogwarts was great, but nothing better than coming home. And then we get a very brief epilogue where Lucius is like, the sleeping sickness didn't work, master. And then Tom Riddle's like, yeah, see? Yeah. And I'll do evil next year. It is interesting because it's no longer like people are getting killed in acts of terrorism at the school. It's like acts of minor tomfoolery and kerfuffle at the school. Yeah. He's not trying to kill people. He's just trying to cause enough trouble to generate a news story, but not enough trouble to hurt anybody. Yeah. It's really weird.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel like that probably takes more planning.
Yeah, absolutely. You gotta have more control over the situation. You can set chaos. You can start a fire really easily. Yeah. It's harder to do something more controlled. Yeah. But yeah, honestly, I got not much else to say other than that. Despite the fact that I complained a lot about problems with the front half, I really still like this first book quite a bit. And I'm really, really, really looking forward to rereading the second one and talking to you more about it, Aidan. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Read it. Read the dang things. Make people read it with you. Come wait in line with us for the actual book.
Be careful about looking this up because if you go looking for fan art, you'll probably wind up on Tumblr pages that are not spoiler free. Yeah. Where they're like, here's art that I've done from the first chapter of book 5.
And also, I will say, like, I definitely have heard of these now that I know a little bit more. I have 100% heard stuff
outside of just me telling you about it.
And I don't remember, really all I remember is like headcanons about live Sirius and James and like them having kids. And I don't think any of it was canon. Like it was literally like a TikTok of them being like, ha ha ha, we can play jokes on our own kids now.
Well, there's a lot of AUs that are like that anyway with those guys alive, so it may have been a different fan fiction.
But I specifically remember Rigel.
Okay, got it. Then there's that. All right. No, this has a bit of a fan base.
I remember seeing it and I was like, who in the ever-loving heck is
Rigel? Who's Rigel? That doesn't make any sense.
I honestly thought that they got the name wrong of the other black that goes and gets the lockets.
Regulus, who will show up later because he ain't dead.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so she has to basically invent something for him because obviously he's dead well before the books start in canon.
So yeah, I thought that's kind of why I remember it, is because I was like, these stupid people, they got the name wrong.
Yeah, Regulus shows up later. What's one thing that's really weird about this first book is that like half the principal characters haven't appeared yet.
Yeah.
Regulus isn't a principal character; he's a minor supporting character. But there's a lot of really critical characters to the plot who just haven't shown up yet. Other people get slipped in with weird functions right up front, like Cho Chang showing up.
Yeah,
and like she has kind of a specific function to the first book. She'll show up a little bit more later, but only when she needs to, because Violet's very good about using her characters, like, I guess judiciously is the right word. But anyway, we've been recording for a long time and we need to stop because I think both of us are hungry and it's getting a little bit later. We need to go eat dinner. So yeah, read these. I don't know, I don't know when this is going to come out, but I guarantee you, even when it comes out the next week, there will not be an episode about the Serpentine Subterfuge because it's going to take us too long to even get halfway through the book, I imagine.
Probably.
Even if it takes me 2 weeks to put this out, which it may. It may take me 2 or 3 weeks. But regardless, while there may be another episode or two of normal research log in between this and the next one, look forward to the return of Aidan and Jacob to discuss probably the front half of the Serpentine Subterfuge. If you want to read, and obviously, try and read ahead if you're into this.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And
read along with us.
Yeah, why not?
Be a fun... It is summer. I had to think. I was like, it's summer? It's a fun summer reading list.
Yeah, it's summer right now. I guess I should have said this up front. Be careful about spoilers in the comments, especially if you read all the books already. But I think don't worry about spoiling the canon Harry Potter books at this point. Anyway, that's all. See you next time, folks. Woo! Magic!